Events in the past. The servant, bowing respectfully, addresses Duke Rudel, who is standing in front of him. She remembers his words in the past about the Duke ruling but not ruling. In response, the young man asks if her opinion has changed since then. The servant refuses to do this. The hero stares at her and expresses his opinion. He believes that it would be more correct not to involve God in human politics. After this statement, the servant begins to shuffle his feet on the floor in order to approach the Duke. He straightens his back and sums up his short speech that he understood everything. The servant keeps a calm expression on his face, continuing to stare at him intently. He says that in this case, according to the oracle, he, as Duke Yoshua Rudel, will be prepared for exile. The hero frowned upon hearing the servant's harsh verdict. The person close to the Duke continued to speak. According to him, politics is what the Duke, who embodies the voice of the Lord, undertakes to do. If he does not want to bear this burden, the servant offers his candidacy. One of the servants asked with horror in his eyes, raising his eyebrows in surprise, whether he was referring to the duchy under the rule of the Holy Virgin, to which the girl irritably reminded the interlocutor that the oracle was talking about this along with the prophecy. She suggested that the knight captain's sense of falsehood finds nothing in his oracle and the cardinal's prophecy. To which her interlocutor bowed his head in thought, and reluctantly agreed, since it was really hard to believe. The Duke turned away from the audience, turned his face to the window, and answered all their above thoughts that he understood everything. The young man rejoiced to himself. Those present finally came to the decision he was seeking. With a serious expression on his face, he replied that it was necessary to follow and not resist the oracle. This was the last thing he could do in his position. The main character thought and indulged in his own dreams, that a comfortable life in his own kingdom awaits him and public affairs will finally bypass him. As a result, it turns out that the reborn young Duke in exile for a long time wanted to take a break from the border and engage in agriculture. He came to the conclusion that there were enough lords in the kingdom without him. The southeastern border of Campholland has very fertile lands. It is literally teeming with various creations of the earth's nature. A cozy estate in the middle of an abundantly growing garden suggests only pleasant thoughts and evokes a feeling of calm and security. There are trees everywhere, rare and bobo grass. Insects have also settled here. Strange beetles are running around the estate. The main character, observing his lands, recognizes that the countryside is the best of the best. On it, he can already safely weed the fields. He watches the servants who work with the land. Only he and a few maids live in this area. Finally, he doesn't care about the lords because there are no people here who need protection. The hero freezes in amazement at the realization of this fact, and at the same time, satisfaction. Now he has no responsibilities, no meeting starting before dark, no more. The Duke still has a memory of his past life. In the past, he was an ordinary office clerk in Japan. The main character died alone from the monotonous work that drained all his strength. The hero woke up in the body of a small child, made sounds familiar to everyone, which are usually made by very newborn children, and cried in a cute basket. He realized that he was born in the body of the Duke's infant son who was just beginning his life's journey, and he was glad that he was so incredibly lucky. However, the main character considered this only during the 3 years he spent in the body of the Duke's son in the kingdom. There was famine in the Rudel Duchy due to poor harvests. The inhabitants of the duchy walked in rags and cried from impotence. As a result, there was a commotion that claimed many lives. The little Duke, looking at the devastation reigning around, realized that if the city was in a state of such crisis further, then a new uprising would arise. Because of this, his dream of a peaceful life in harmony with himself and nature will still remain unfulfilled. From that moment on, the main character began to act. He was immersed in studying various books and documents. Devoted to his father and the ministers, using the knowledge he had gained in his previous life about modern Japan, he began to restore the duchy. With the help of this knowledge, the young man began to carry out one reform after another and, thanks to this, managed to gain the support of the people. However, all the efforts made earlier did not bring his calm, quiet, and measured life any closer. The boy, squinting against the daylight that penetrated into the room, heard someone's footsteps and the fact that someone was calling him. He allowed the newcomer to enter. A man named Runberg was standing in the doorway. He politely apologized to the young gentleman for disturbing him at such an hour. The boy in the shirt got up from the bed, which made it creak. Frowning, the main character asked what happened. Rumbert brought bad news to the gentleman. They risk being left without food if everything continues. The hero, perplexed, asked the newcomer about the suitability of the local land. It turned out that the land in this region is absolutely barren. The young gentleman, waving away the above with his hands, replied that they are still always able to buy food, even if nothing grows. But the servant replied that it would not work. To his fear, this will be very difficult. The information he heard from Rumbert shocked the young gentleman, and at the same time those present expected to see the Duke in a fit of rage. He tactfully remained silent after what the newcomer had said earlier. In a state of passion, the boy rushed to the window and abruptly opened it to see what was happening outside the estate. The assembled residents were whispering among themselves when they saw the young gentleman leaning out of the window. They loudly exclaimed that in front of them was none other than Joshua. The boy began to realize with horror the frightening reality, and at the same time the approaching terrifying consequences. He exclaimed, "Is this really serious? And is it really happening?" Rumbert, struggling with his own excitement, continued to speak. In the past, a lot of people really followed the gentleman with their belongings. He insisted that even though he was an exiled Joshua, his influence remained the same. To which the young gentleman sighed heavily. The main character understood that the people he had seen earlier in his bedroom window were just one of the first. In the future, more and more residents will come to it. The messenger said that he came on horseback, and so far only those who walk fast and live near his estate are in front of the Duke. After analyzing everything that was said earlier, the boy realized that in this case, there really would not be enough food. Turning to face Rumbert and emerging from his own deep thoughts, the young Duke ordered him to hold an emergency meeting, gather Ellie and the others. The boy was determined to solve this problem as quickly as possible. He wanted to have a good rest after her successful decision. For a while, he is ready to say goodbye to his quiet life. The boy, leading all those gathered, began to give instructions to everyone. There was a map in front of him, and he was showing everyone the territory of this place. It was necessary to explore the surroundings, find out if dangerous animals live nearby, and understand if medicinal herbs grow. The Duke also asked to cooperate with the arrivals, that is, with those who are ready to help solve the problem, to which he was asked to take his leave and proceed with the execution of his instructions. However, there was something that shocked the boy. There was suddenly a podium in the middle of the audience, but he was not aware of where it came from. Rumbert, smiling, informed the young man that it was a gift from his people now officially. The hero only laughed in response and was even more embarrassed. People saw him as a real leader. Despite the situation, they all remained in a pleasant mood. When the Duke entered the pedestal, there were lively shouts from the crowd. The Duke began his speech. He admitted that the people of Rudel Duchy had indeed gone so far as to follow him to this place called Kampaland. He continued to speak more confidently. He thanked everyone for coming here instead of the rich duchy, to him for help, to which the audience shouted approvingly that only he was considered the true ruler, Joshua. The atmosphere and the cheers of the crowd truly pleased him. He invited the audience to live on his land with him. He was thinking that in such an environment, he couldn't just ask people to come back. Even though the land was completely barren, the inhabitants wanted to live with him, and only shouted their approval louder. The young man loudly slammed his hands on the table, attracting the attention of the enthusiastic audience even more. He understood everything. Even he himself felt the need for food. He resolutely promised all those gathered on the square to solve this problem in 3 years. He will save the inhabitants from hunger during this time, and only then will he finally be able to become a symbol of well-being, thinking to himself that after that he will begin to lead a quiet life. Meanwhile, the Duke's wards began to follow his instructions, to study herbs, berries, and track down animals living nearby. The Duke thanked everyone for their efficiency and diligence, looking at the results of the team's research in front of him. Noting that they had pulled out some root crops by the roots, the girl said that they did this in order to find roots that are suitable for food, as the young man had previously taught. He took a deep breath. He had the ability to evaluate plants, to understand which ones were suitable for food, only by looking at them closely. It was his gift, an ability given by God at birth. After that, the young man stared at the plant growing in front of him. He immediately saw that this plant is called kasaba, and it is suitable for fruit in its raw form. He realized that it could be used instead of wheat, so he ordered to focus on growing it instead of wheat. The girl asked if her leaves would become wheat after a while, to which the character replied that, like a potato, when its roots swell and resemble bulbs, they can be dug up, processed, and then baked bread. The girl became very interested in what kind of bread from the Kosovo would taste like. But the other one has already begun to call the Duke, like Joshua himself. She said that the guys had returned from scouting the area. The Duke wanted to hear them out as soon as possible. Runberg asked for permission to report first. He explored the north, Valtor explored the south. And I found that a medium-sized river flows north 30 minutes away. Due to the high speed of the current, it is extremely difficult to cross it. Without diving, he cannot tell its length, but given its width, which is more than 20 meters, it can be assumed that the depth will be great. There are rocks behind it. You can't see anything behind them. But in the north of the river, there are suitable forests for hunting. On the opposite side of the river, on the contrary, trees are sparse and mostly bare ground. The Duke thanked him for his research and, based on their information, amended his map, which lay on his desk in front of him. After that, the young man demanded to report to Valtor, to which he shouted a loud and legible acceptance of the command. Valtor began to say that, in his opinion, the southeastern part connects to the forest in the northeast. In the south, the land is mostly brownish, and there were practically no trees either. He noticed an overhanging cliff 100 meters high in the north. He summed up that if you fall off it, you won't be able to collect bones in the future. The Duke thanked him once again for the work he had done. He also asked if he had noticed any plants or animals. Valtor exclaimed that he had noticed deer and wild boars there, and even brought something interesting with him. He dumped everything on Joshua-sama's table, to which Runberg responded with obvious disapproval. However, the Duke watched each of the gifts of nature with fascination, staring at them in order to understand, thanks to his abilities, whether they were edible at all. Thanks to his gift, he realized that in front of him, he had already known guava, an edible fruit, and pineapple. The ability showed the name of this fruit in this world. Pineapple was called the favorite of murderers here. Puzzled, the Duke scratched his chin and assumed that monsters liked him, judging by his name. The young man ordered to plant a pineapple in a remote place and see if it would attract someone. In this case, everyone will be able to eat pineapple and guava for dessert regularly. All the members of the research group began, without hiding their own curiosity, to try the edible finds. They liked everything. After a hard day's work as a Duke, the young man slammed the door of his own room and finally fell into the soft, his most beloved pillow. Before going to bed, he began to calm himself with thoughts that his quiet life was waiting for him in just 3 years. In another estate, they start looking for Duke Rudel in a panic. Someone came back with the news and began asking people in the hall if the Duke was there, if he had really been expelled from England. The girl interrupts the lively discussions about the Duke and politely asks what is bothering the newcomer. She reminds us to do everything the Lord says. There was no need for hesitation and doubt. Without a single doubt in her voice, clearly and confidently, she proclaims that there is only the will of the Lord for everything. The little girl, having learned from the messenger that Joshua was in exile and had already arrived in her lands, dropped everything from her hands. She didn't understand how this was possible if he was from the nobility. She took off her researcher's clothes and shouted as she ran away that she would not forgive the young man for this. The girl ordered to complete the study without her. The dwarf Thor and the dwarf Garm remembered Yoshua and confirmed the information received by the lady. They said that he really got into such a wilderness. Suddenly, the Duke flies into the courtyard and addresses the guys. He says he's very surprised and glad to see everyone here. He also asked about their shop in the duchy. They replied that there were 3 other people in the shop besides them, and there would certainly be someone to look after her. The dwarf Thor once again clarifies whether the Duke who has arrived knows that there is nothing on these lands, no fields, no houses. Therefore, he is curious to see what he is going to do in such a case. Dwarf Garm interrupts everyone, squeezes his eyes shut, holding back his own laughter. He wants to tell everyone about something. Garm says there are no magic stones here. In response, the Duke plunged into heavy thoughts, because magic stones in this world are kind of batteries that use magical energy, like using electricity in everyday life. He replied to the dwarf that, despite this, they would be able to find a solution. Some inconveniences will have to be endured for a while. The little girl, standing on the bags, towering over the interlocutors, assured them that there was no need to worry. Since there are no magic stones on this earth, they use its own uniqueness. The young man raised his head, trying to figure out where she was talking from, and then addressed her, calling her Sequoia. He is surprised that even she was here. But the girl started talking, interrupting him. She's heard a lot about the land here, and for this reason, she brought some good things in bags. The girl, looking with admiration at her own invention, asks to pay attention to it. She lifts a long-lasting lantern into the air, which does not use the power of magic stones. Instead, he uses the components of the talking stone. The Duke realizes that this is not his usual lantern, but a bomb that the girl activates before his eyes. An explosion occurs, from which the girl falls to the ground. She says with chagrin that this is her next failure. The research team, together with Shoka, is already gathering in the Duke's office to receive further instructions. The young man orders Aura, along with others, to go in search of land for Kisaba, and the rest to engage in logging. All members of the group agree, in the form of short exclamations. The Duke asks Arua to gather roots in time to find land for Kasava. Then he will personally review them. Someone is asking about what to do with the forest in this case. The leader calms everyone down and says that there is no need to worry about it yet. He would talk to Garm about that, since earlier the Duke had asked him to look for lime and talking stones. The girl responds with agreement and a small nod of her head, saying that now everything has become clear to her. Finally, the young man turned to Runberg. He bowed his head respectfully, showing respect and full attention to the Duke's wise words. The boy ordered him to take a horse to ride along the river to the north. He may not take many people with him today. The young man wants him to scout the situation in the north of the river. Runberg asked him how much time should be given to him to complete this task. The Duke assumed that it would take him no more than 10 minutes on horseback. As he left to proceed with the Duke's instructions, he summed up that water resources are undoubtedly important for life. The girl from the squad asked Joshua-sama to express one more thought. The Duke did not refuse her this. She asked if the young man plans to organize a town here, given such large-scale land surveys. He confirmed her guess, saying that since people would gradually arrive, he thought it was necessary to prepare for this. In this case, the girl voiced the idea of naming the city and, accordingly, the river. Embarrassed, he agreed with this idea. The little girl shouted that she knew what to call the city. She suggested some kind of incomplete name, but it gave him the idea of which name to choose. He started telling Shikoi about the Yamanote line, which he would like to run a train on one day. One of the followers noticed that earlier Joshua had talked about the city of sciences. Slapping the table with his hand, the Duke decided to name the city Kaga Kutoshi because of the absence of magic stones on his land. The idea of how to name the river was born in the young man's head. The name of the city helped to come up with a suitable name. The audience was waiting for an answer. The name of the city should correspond to the name of the river, because otherwise there will be no logic. The Duke exclaimed that in that case, the river should be called the Rubicon. This name carries the meaning of the beginning of a new beginning. The Rubicon is also the river that Julius Caesar crossed. Runberg replied that this name touches him to the depths of his soul. In confirmation of this, he let out a tear. Since the title was finished, the Duke turned to Walter with an assignment. Joshua ordered him to explore the western and eastern wastelands, as well as the southern forest, and try to dig something up. In response to this, Valtor, grinning, replied that he would not refuse to dig up stones. The main character also asked him to see if there was a black pond or something else strange, but he stopped talking for a moment, thinking. Another request of the gentleman was to take Ashoka with him for research, to which Valtor readily agreed, because he had a free place on a horse. Sabi began to actively agree with this proposal and added that she was very good at navigating the forest. She won't lose to the elves in this, let alone humans. Valtor asked her to find something that Joshua would like. She understands better than anyone what he meant. Their further actions depend directly on what they find together today. They need ore, sand, and various plants. Many workers cut down trees to have access to a tree for various needs. Due to the help of the residents, the work is going much faster. The Duke came out of the manor to ask how the work was progressing. He asked what happened to the dwarf, if there is any problem. The dwarf replied to the young gentleman that nothing serious had happened, but there was bad news. Unfortunately, he couldn't find the burning stones. Although there was no magic in burning stones, They emit heat, so they are necessary in everyday life. The Duke doesn't know what to do next. The girl from the research team noted that if there are no burning stones or anything else that can be used as fuel, it will be very difficult to make a fire. Many people thought that burning stones were easy to find, and they were literally lying under everyone's feet. The dwarf Torah wonders if they will have to be ordered. The Duke shook his head. From the very beginning, he didn't want to ask someone for something so simple, basic. The young man is determined to find a way to replace them. The dwarf suggests the last solution, to make coal from firewood, since there is nothing else left in this situation. The Duke, in response, asks to try to do at least something. In the hope, the other researchers call Garm to check his progress and see if he has found coal. But the earth is crumbling in Garm's hands, which means that there are still no stones in the place where he is fighting. The Duke told Garm about the news about the burning stones from the Torah. Garm himself also did not please the young man with the news. There were no signs of them where he conducted the research. The hero decided to go and see the river, about which there was so much talk. The research report did not lie. The width of the river, as they said, is about 20 meters. Its course is quite fast. As for the depth, in the Duke's opinion, it doesn't look like the depth was the same magnitude. After his own exploration of the river, the Duke came up with a new plan. He told the research girl that he could try something else. The girl was looking forward to a solution to today's problem. Finally, Joshua came up with something. The Duke called out to Garm. With a smile on his face, the young man proposed a new solution. He suggested that Garm build a water wheel. Garm inquiringly asked if the Duke really wanted to build a water wheel. The young man assured that together with him and Tor, they would definitely cope. Confident in his words and his early offer, the young master said that Shakoya would help them too. First, they will build one wheel, and then 3 pieces at once. Garm was excited about this idea. He was interested in her, and he asked to leave this matter to him, as it would still be a good training for his students. The main character decided to look around. He stared intently at the other side of the river, as he was insanely curious about what was on the other side. He asked the girl if there was any way to get to the other side, to which the girl exclaimed that it was not necessary to do this, because it was very dangerous. The Duke continued to think about how best to do this, and even suggested building a boat. But the girl had her own way. She asked the young man to jump into her arms so that she could personally ferry him to the other shore, at which the young gentleman was confused and stared with incomprehension. This method was clearly not for him. The girl was upset, thinking that the main character did not trust her. The Duke replied that it was not a matter of trust. He is afraid that she will get wet and therefore confused. The maid started whimpering and crying and saying that he was probably embarrassed to ride on her back. The young man repeated that it was still not that, but that she would get wet. The girl said that she did not see this as a problem, and that was why she was the maid. The hero did not find anything else to answer against agreed, because there was nothing to do with her determination. He said he would give it to her. The maid apologized in advance to the young gentleman, grabbed his hand, and then took him in such a way that he himself did not interfere with her jumping the river. For a moment, the young man was afraid. It even seemed to him that his heart stopped for a minute. But nevertheless, the girl landed gently on the ground, without injuring either herself or the Duke in any way. Stammering, the guy thanked her for the successful crossing. As the main character expected, there were no old trees on the opposite side. The girl replied to him that it looked like he was right. Thinking about it, the hero suggested the following. Perhaps something happened that destroyed them one day. The heroes began to look around. The color of the rock located on this side of the river seemed to be a dull cream. The girl also touched her, commenting that she was very cool. She asked if the hero had found something. He replied that nothing was clear yet. In this case, you need to take some action. He tapped the rock with something hard several times and sand immediately fell down from it. The main character turned to the maid Ellie, paying attention to the contents in his hand. He explained that there is transparent sand on this shore. It is a component of glass. Ellie's eyes sparkled with amazement. She asked the Duke if he had planned everything in advance and had immediately come here to get the sand, to which the hero replied that it was little more than a coincidence. He's here for another one. He told Ellie that he would look at something when he returned to the estate, but he believed that the vegetation in the area had been destroyed by a volcanic eruption. Ellie replied that maybe this land was burned by dragons. The young man did not rule out such a possibility. The heroine hastened to reassure the Duke, saying that dragons and the like are rarely found near human settlements, so he has no reason to worry. A giant snail, several times larger than themselves, suddenly appeared in front of the heroes. They froze in amazement. A pair of glowing monster eyes looked expectantly at the heroes from the darkness. It was preparing to attack them. They stood for a while, staring in horror at the giant snail and the inhabitants of the forest. The Duke was alerted by a bird that, hungry, decided to violently attack this snail. The young man was very scared and concluded that they were very voracious, continuing to shudder with fear. Ellie, without a shadow of fear, without losing her composure, loudly told him that he needed to leave quickly. Meanwhile, Valtor has found an ideal place to grow heat-loving pineapples in the eastern part of the forest. Garuga confirmed Joshua's words about the name of the pineapple. The killer trees really came to him. He said that's what the locals call these trees, but technically they are walking plants. The interlocutor praised him for such extensive knowledge in this field, although Garuga brushed off these words, saying that it was just knowledge of the basics. At this time, Valtor was hailed by a researcher walking in front. He told him that, if necessary, killer trees can hunt animals that are attracted by the scent of berries. That is, they are setting up an ambush. Garuga added to what was said. Explaining, Valtor asked the co-riders what they should do with the killer trees and suggested cutting them down altogether. But Garuga asked the others to wait, as he noticed that something unusual was happening in this place. He noticed some rustling in the bushes, which strongly attracted his attention and made him freeze in place for a while. Garuga, looking even more closely at this bush, suspected something about himself. He felt a surge of excitement. At the same time, Valtor calmed everyone present. He said that they can approach and not be afraid, because they are not the target of the killer trees at all. They came closer. The researcher frowned, waiting for what awaits them next, and Garuga, in response to the rustling and some kind of outgoing lightning from this place, angrily bared his teeth. In front of the heroes, a villainous mouth with a huge number of fangs began to form from the killer trees. This dangerous something was heading towards Valtor and his assistant with great speed, tearing its roots out of the ground more and more. Lightning began to flash around the formed something, short-term flashes that were born incomprehensibly for some reason, and attacked the stems of the plant. Garuga looked at what was happening with horror, not understanding whether it was flashes or lightning. Valtor only tightened his grip on the handle of his own bow, maintaining a frightening calm. Garuga offered to leave, but Valtor didn't like his partner's idea. He was not willing to leave so easily. He said that plants with such abilities are really very rare, and Mr. Joshua is very likely to be interested in this. So you need to try to kill him and take him to the Duke. To which Garuga did not understand this at all. Valtor, smiling, on a rush of adrenaline, replied that the gentleman should judge them in this situation and decide what to do anyway. Researchers at the end of the working day, as usual, find themselves in the Duke's office, and he attentively listens to the report on the work done by everyone for today. He wanted to hear Valtor's report. He said that he had found new berries and had already brought them to the residence. The young Duke likes what he has heard, and he sincerely thanks him for the work he has done. But the man wants to tell you something else. He continues that he spent the rest of the day watching the killer trees and their prey to understand their hunting tactics. The Duke asked if the pineapples had attracted them after all, to which Valtor agreed, adding that they remain in the thicket. The young gentleman asked if he had assessed the situation, if he could confirm that the plants were dangerous. The researcher pointedly said yes, recalling the events of the past day and the beast that surprised him. He added that the animals that hunt walking plants use lightning, and they definitely pose the greatest danger. The gentleman jumped up from his seat, exclaiming in surprise how lightning could come from there. Valtor, anticipating the Duke's reaction, asked if he was really interested, relying on his self-explanatory reaction to what he heard. The researcher asked what should be done with them in the foreseeable future. Start exterminating them, or still make a number of more observations. The boy, thinking, rubbing his chin with his hand out of habit, came to the conclusion that lightning is still electricity. The young gentleman had an incredible idea. To get electricity from monsters, although it is incredibly difficult, if they still know how to create lightning and their power can be curbed in some way, it is definitely worth trying. For this reason, After making the necessary notes in his notebook, he ordered Valter to watch the thunder beasts in order to try to catch them after a while. The researcher happily responded by proclaiming that if Joshua had come up with such a name for these animals, then they would continue to call them that. The young duke suggested that since thunderbolts had long ago learned how to generate electricity, other animals should live next to them, already insensitive to them. If they take advantage of this, then eventually they will succeed. Valter and the others were shocked by what they heard. They all admitted that the duke's wise words were a well-thought-out plan. The research group's report continued. The duke asked the dwarf Thor and the others to look at the stones he had found himself and determine if there were any valuable materials among them. The dwarf determined the name of each one in turn. He determined that there was a blue metal, mithril, and iron in front of him. The girl applauded the famous seeker's nose for minerals. Thor continued that among the minerals found by the gentleman are halite, copper, glass, volcanic ash, iron, and several other varieties of rare magic ore, to which the duke happily replied that at least they had the last one. The young gentleman made the necessary notes again, wondered about the availability of the required amount of volume. He assumed that there would certainly be no problems with volcanic ash and glass. The duke asked if Bardo knew what halite was. The latter replied that he was aware. This is the kind of thing that if you lick it, it remains salty in taste. Joshua replied that his answer was correct. He asked Bardo to discuss with Runeberg how much of it they would need, and then start mining it. Apparently both halite, ash, and iron are needed by them in large quantities, especially volcanic ash. Joshua hastened to add that there is also a need for a structure that will help transport the received materials. I asked Thor if he could help in this situation. Also, the hero did not forget about how they brought him a special pedestal and added that, in this case, there is a high probability that everything is fine with it. And this explains something. They'll just borrow the wagons from the visitors. The main character continued to give instructions to all those present. They will have to put the extracted volcanic ash in 2 places, on the shore of the Rubicon and further away, at the back of the estate. Most of it will fall on the latter, to which they replied that everything would be done. Bardo also asked why they needed volcanic ash at all. Romberg asked for an indignant look at him for being too talkative. The Duke began to explain that there are several ways to use volcanic ash. He's only interested in 2 of them right now. In the first case, by mixing volcanic ash with sand, they can get cement, which they will mainly need to build house walls. Bardo clarified whether what he was talking about was, in a peculiar way, the white thing that bricks are placed on. The main character explained that it is called cement. Cement will be useful to them when they brick sidewalks. The second use of volcanic ash, Joshua continued to say, requires additional efforts. While the cement is still hardening, it will need to be mixed with the fragmentation of stones or bricks. This way, you will get durable concrete. Using this concrete, the young master wants to build a wall that protects against monsters, so there is no need to hurry. Everyone was impressed by the wise arguments of the gentleman. Joshua said that he studied the manufacture of concrete back in the duchy with Sequoia. Since he has no practical experience, he considers it logical to entrust experiments with production to her. The girl was glad. Rumberg, after the hero finished his speech, asked if such a clear plan of the gentleman, about working at 2 points at once, did not mean that a plan for the future of the city had already been born in Joshua-sama's head. The hero agreed. He said that he wanted to discuss the city's construction plan with everyone present and listen to everyone's opinion, also warning in advance that if any of them have doubts or any ideas, he convincingly asks everyone to speak out, regardless of rank. Crossing his arms over his chest, the young gentleman began to speak. He decided to tell everyone about how he imagined the city plan. It will be surrounded by a concrete wall and a moat along the perimeter. The height of the wall may be slightly lower than itself. This will be enough. Runber added that if they had to face hostile animals rather than humans, then the height of a rule would be enough. The hero thanked the servant for the amendments. He went on to say that there would have to be a water wheel in the center of the city, right on the shore of the Rubicon. The hero explained that he does not have the city center that they imagined. This is not the center where the streets and shops are located. Since the necessary water source is located in the center, many facilities need to be built. The city, functionality, management, that's what the hero thinks the city center will mean. One of the researchers addressed the Duke by name, but then a wave of shame and embarrassment swept over her. The main character asked if she wanted to ask some question or express her ideas on this matter. The girl became even more confused and began to stutter and deny. The young gentleman assured her that there was no need to hurry, and she could express her opinion without hesitation. Hunched over, awkwardly, she still decided to ask her question. She wanted to know if it was necessary to build a wheel right by the water. The hero thanked her for voicing this question. Building it next to the water is the most desirable option for everyone. She asked him why this was the most desirable option. The Duke replied that he himself had come to the conclusion that the land here was not rich at all. He does not mean that the lands are not fertile. They simply do not have any ore, or anything that can be used as fuel. The lack of fuel is especially unfavorable for. The girl finally realized that since they did not have the usual fuel for everyone, they would use water instead. The hero exclaimed that this was the truth. Flowing water will transfer energy, and that is what they will be able to use in the future. They will see for themselves after a while. Everyone present gaped in surprise and realization. Everything finally became clear to the girl. The Duke said that the river would flow through the center of the city, and since the northern part ends with inaccessible cliffs beyond the river, this would be the best natural protection. And they will get glass and ashes from the rocks. The hero went on to say that the river would become the heart of the city, and it would spread far to the south. This will make the territory of the city too large, because the cultivated fields will also be within the city limits. After that, they will move agriculture beyond the walls of the city. The maid politely asked for the floor, interrupting the Duke's speech with a raised hand. She said that he explained the size of the city very clearly to everyone. In her opinion, directly concerns Joshua himself. All this knowledge about the arrangement of the commercial part of the city, all this wisdom is contained in his excellent mind. The Duke changed the subject, not finding what to say to this compliment. He said that he would like to rely on the opinion of his subjects by zoning the city. He asked Garm and Thor how things were going with the wood. They replied that soon the logs could be put into operation. The young gentleman turned to Romberg, summing up that, in that case, they need to hurry up with at least an approximate sketch of the city zones. The solution of all particulars must be provided to all subjects. In response, Romberg bowed and promised that everything would soon be fulfilled in accordance with his words. Joshua continued that at this time he would like to take up road construction. After all, the roads diverging to the 4 cardinal directions are wide enough for carriages to travel freely. He would like to build a large highway. He turned to the servants and expressed his will that even more should be built. 2 additional lines, from northeast to southwest and from northwest to southeast. Romberg asked what the road surface would be like then. The Duke replied that they would deal with it later. For now, it was necessary to place seats. To which, as always, Romberg replied that his order would be obeyed. The boy was lost in his own thoughts. He said that he liked the look of the brick pavement. Maybe they would pave the roads with bricks, along with the construction of brick houses. He apologized to Ellie for being distracted while she was talking, and asked her to repeat what she had said earlier. She repeated her question. She wondered if she understood correctly that the place where all the paths intersect should be open and large. The Duke answered her question positively. According to him, perhaps at first the place will have to be made too big. She also added that she wanted to suggest an idea in connection with what they were discussing. The young master was looking forward to hearing this from Ellie. He turned to her, asking what she meant. She noted that he had not yet announced to everyone what the city would be called. She suggested installing something in the city that would symbolize its name. But she said he might think it was a stupid idea. Joshua exclaimed that it was an amazing idea. He told Ellie to take on this project with Aura. In turn, Garm and Tor will help with the implementation of the project. The maid asked if he was joking and if he would really entrust this important and complex project to them. Smiling, he agreed, but the responsibility for his execution will rest on the shoulders of Aurora and Ellie. They were delighted and promised that they would do everything possible and impossible to create a symbol worthy of transmission from generation to generation. The Duke was inspired and scared at the same time by their serious enthusiasm. He told the girls that he was completely relying on them. The heroes have already built a wheel, placing it in the center of the city. They were checking his performance. Everyone exclaimed joyfully that it looked like it was working. The dwarf Thor summed it up by saying that once they were sure that the wheel was working, he would tell his students to put it away. The Duke said that he would like to make the axle of a water wheel out of iron or mithril. But they don't have a furnace to implement this idea, so the axle is made of wood. Joshua said that from now on, Garay and his guys will do urgent work, but they need a stove. Sequoia said it would have to wait. The Duke privately assumed that she would probably not be here in the near future. As they walked back, Aurora was attracted by a reed stem that swayed in the wind. He tried to control himself, mentally repeating that he was no longer a child at all. The Duke apologized for picking a favorite stem. He asked Aurora if she wanted to play with them. There was a reed in his hands. He added that if you dry and process it, you can get a lot of different things out of it. She exclaimed that Joshua is very smart himself, although the Duke refused, saying that this was just well-known information. The girl quickly ran away somewhere, leaving the young gentleman alone, wondering what had happened. Garm was banging on something, smashing some oars with his hammer, surrounded by assistants. The Duke thought it sounded clear and loud. The Duke, perplexed, asked what they were doing, assuming that they were making an oven. Garm replied that when the mortar hardens, it will turn out to be a concrete furnace. Everyone stared at the clay structure, not understanding how the incomprehensible mixture was called concrete. Concrete was being mixed in some kind of container. Concrete made using volcanic ash is called Roman concrete. The young master was sure that this furnace would turn out to be much stronger than clay, but it would take time to solidify. He thought how good they were at this activity, but then he saw that concrete had begun to be poured onto the structure. The Duke was about to leave, saying that he would see how everything turned out tomorrow, and he was grateful to the craftsmen for their work. But he was suddenly stopped, saying that the tempering was not finished yet. The dwarf exclaimed that now he and the dwarf would show what only they were capable of. Sequoia also exclaimed that she would help. They gathered around an incomprehensible structure, and she, holding a staff in her hands, prepared to use magic. Thor and the dwarf clasped their hands, both concentrating, frowning heavily. The dwarf turned to the spirits of fire and wind, and the dwarf called the spirits of earth and wind to help them. The girl exclaimed that it was her turn now. She raised the scepter above her head, sending a squall of wind directly at the standing structure. There was a magic stone on her scepter, thanks to which she summoned the spirit of the wind, bird. Due to the strength and powerful squall of wind that the bird god directed, the structure was perfectly finished with concrete. The Duke exclaimed in disbelief. The young gentleman touched one of the walls with his hand to check whether the concrete had really frozen in such a short time. He was very surprised to make sure that the concrete had hardened after all. The heroes lived faithfully at the creation that they had created. Magic is really incredible. The Duke saw it for himself today. Joshua asked if he could discuss the subsequent work with those present because the construction of the furnace is just the beginning. The Duke continued to develop the idea to the researchers. He said that the first thing they need to do is build a forge. He wants their students to build a building around the furnace. To build the bellows, in addition to the furnace, they used the power of a water wheel. After that, he turned to Aurora. He asked if he could ask her for anything other than an escort. She replied that she had to be where Joshua could see her. In that case, he asked the servant to collect the reeds, which were located within his sight, because he was not far away. The Duke noticed that Thor was kneading something with his hands. This interested the gentleman. He asked what it was, trying to feel an unfamiliar object. It felt like a soft rubber hose. He had never seen anything like rubber in these parts. The Duke looked at her disappointingly, thinking that if this was rubber, then he must have made a fortune. But it was too late to think about it. The dwarf Thor said that it was not rubber, but the skin of an imperial frog. However, it's not so easy to get it. He couldn't just skin it and use it in production. The process of obtaining it is similar to tanning hides. The Duke asked if the materials used were different from those used in tanning. The dwarf replied, giving himself a few seconds to think, that in his opinion, there would be the same ones. The young gentleman tightened his grip on the animal's skin. He said he hoped there were imperial frogs in the area. He also warned the others that there were probably monsters similar to them in the area. The young gentleman mentally planned to talk to Walter about this, since he does not like the idea of catching frogs at all. The dwarf looked at the boy warily and expressed his thoughts aloud. For sure, his expression again says that he is up to something. The Duke recalled that rubber products were ubiquitous in Japan. He concluded that if they could produce rubber, they would have many opportunities. He told the dwarf that they would make a lot of things out of rubber. Perhaps they will find some kind of plant instead of frogs. We need to explore all possible options. The Duke watched from the window of his office the unenviable state of life of his people, thinking to themselves that they need to improve the living conditions for ordinary people as soon as possible. He recalled Ronbert's recent report that the elderly and people with poor health were housed in hastily built huts. If there are more people in the future, then it will be difficult to accommodate them, and the situation will become even more complicated. The Duke decided to address the people with a speech, standing at their earlier pedestal brought to him. The residents of the city froze in anticipation. He raised the tone of his voice, saying that he was going to build a city on this land. The young gentleman asked if the people would help him to carry out this task. Everyone began to respond violently to him, saying that they were certainly ready to help and they were forever with him, Joshua. The Duke continued to speak, saying aloud a fact that was obvious to everyone. He said he was no longer the Duke of Rudel, but he also added that in order to rule this land, he would need a name. Now, in front of a surprised audience, he began to declare, drawing in more air to gather himself, and draw even more attention to his words. The Duke found the strength to continue. The gentleman exclaimed that now the city, located on the border of Kanpaland, would henceforth be called the Oracle by everyone, and from now on he will bear the title of Count of the Borderlands. He asked the people to forget about his past name, Rudel, and call him simply Joshua instead. He continued talking. So far, they are not all united as a nation, but are just starting to build their homes. But by uniting their consciousness, they will be able to work towards achieving a common goal. He is sure that they will succeed. Meanwhile, in Rudel County, a subordinate of His Holiness asked him to sign a certain document which he held in his hands. He persuasively asked to take this document, to which he simply held out his hand for the servant to put it in it. With the power of her mind, Her Holiness burned the seal in the place where it was needed in this document, which surprised the subordinate standing behind. He handed over the document along with the signature. for which the servant said that he humbly thanked him for this service. But after that, he addressed Silwardes by name. The servant, perplexed, asked what was the matter. His master continued by asking in response to this question whether everything that is happening is really necessary. She continued her thought, saying that after all, everything is really in God's hands, and He will be as He wishes. She asked if they really had no choice in this case. Silwardes replied that they might have a choice, but at the moment, nothing could be changed. He hurried away, wanting to avoid an unpleasant conversation, but he stopped as the gentleman continued to speak. Her Holiness, the question of whether Duke Rudel was really the sincere wish of the oracle. The servant replied that one way or another there was nothing to be done, because the Lord had not told them anything until then. Silwardes angrily slammed his fist on the table, loudly and vexedly, not understanding why the girl was saying that. He said that the Levenstock Beastmen tribe had suddenly grown cold towards them. This news did not please the man sitting opposite. He exclaimed that, for his part, he had done everything possible to keep the country behind him, and now he did not understand what else they needed from him. Another aristocrat answered him, saying that everything that was happening was terrible. He also visited Al today. His interlocutor was wondering if she had listened to his advice. He replied regretfully that according to his arguments, she was unlikely to listen to him, since she is the one chosen by the Lord himself, and she is an oracle. No aristocrat dares to order her, and also tell her what she should do. There are still traces of the fame that Duke Rudel achieved, but to his fears, it is unlikely to last long. The other agreed with his arguments, nodding his head and saying the ambiguous exactly. Both lowered their heads regretfully, sighing regretfully. He asked if Silwardes had heard rumors that someone very similar to the Lord, but clearly not, had finally left the country. The listener suggested that it looked like it was the Duke's daughter, as she loves him and believes in him unconditionally. The servant said that he also wanted to go to Duke Rudel. However, he stressed that giving up his beloved duchy would still tarnish all his achievements. The other agreed with him. You can't just leave the estate, even if it becomes completely impoverished. The Duke went out into the square, addressing the residents with a speech. He expressed gratitude to all the inhabitants of the fief, because thanks to their work, they managed to harvest a huge amount of wood in a short time. For this reason, Joshua thanks them from the bottom of his heart. The people looked at the Duke with admiration. Each of them realized that he seemed to really care about his subjects. Joshua heard this, and said in confusion that he had only briefly thanked them. The young gentleman continued his speech, saying that he would like to arrange housing for the inhabitants of the fief as soon as possible, but he would have to wait until the prepared wood dries. He asked if there was anyone among the residents who could dry it. There were those among the residents who raised their hand, to which Joshua exclaimed a joyful thank you. The Duke continued to speak. He informed the residents that they would receive instructions on further actions from Runeberg, who is currently here. If the farmers have any questions, he asks them to contact Arura. He asked other residents to speak out, to which everyone started shouting their own question, continuing to chatter. The Duke grinned at this, saying that there was already one request for Rumbert just now. Rumbert wiping sweat from stress. He replied to the Duke that no matter what the request was, he was ready to carry out any of his orders. Joshua asked the servant if he remembered their discussion about the planned road construction. He had already realized in his mind that it could not be laid here. Runeberg replied that he remembered it very clearly. The young gentleman asked him if it would be possible to draw a line using crushed lime instead of ropes, which they do not have. The servant replied that if he was talking about it, then of course it was possible. Then the Duke asked if he could draw a line from the palace to the central square because people always walk near the palace. Runberg replied that he understood his request and everything would be fulfilled. After the wood dries, the housing will be built quickly. At the same time, the Duke wants to secure a place for the road. Joshua also said that he would like to come to Garm and his comrades with some kind of gift. But he also, sitting on a horse, turned to Ellie, that if he returned to the palace now, it would be too late. The maid answered him, thinking about how to get out of this situation, and what kind of gift to come up with in such a short time. She told Mr. Joshua to leave it to her, and personally dismount from the horse. The gentleman himself looked at the girl questioningly. Ellie started fishing from the fast-flowing river. Joshua was amazed at this, as he did not even see her hands. The maid was diving so deeply after her. The girl, having caught enough fish, said that people like her had been trained to do this so that in an emergency they could feed him. She continued that it was a necessary skill for a maid. Joshua thought to himself that even though she was a maid, she looked more like a martial artist. Ronberg has said in the past that you can completely trust the maid, so she was hired right away. After a while, the Duke and the maid finally arrived at the shore of the Rubicon River. The dwarf Thor babbled with concern that a very important bird had arrived. Joshua has finally arrived. The dwarf called him Baby Joshua because of his age. His interlocutor was surprised that Joshua himself came to them. They reported to the young master that they had finished the forge and finished with the water wheel. They continued to show the success of their fruitful work. The Duke was all ears. He was attracted by a mysterious box in the yard. Ellie looked at him warily, asking the gentleman what kind of box it was that stood in front of them. This wooden box, as it turned out, is a bellows. They pump air. The bellows are driven by a water wheel and thus pump air into the forge furnace. Joshua said that if you use fossil fuels, the resulting heat will be enough to heat the furnace to the melting point of iron. But if there is no fuel, you have to burn firewood and charcoal, but they will not give the right temperature. The others understood the Duke's words. He continued that the wood will ignite only with the help of a strong airflow during ignition. By analogy, he invented a mechanism that blows air to increase the temperature in the furnace. The young man said that to pump air with a hand pump, labor is needed, and the workers will get terribly tired doing it. Therefore, it is in this situation that the water wheel comes into play. It will help replace human labor with machine labor. Shikoya was surprised to realize one thing and loudly exclaimed that with the arrival of Yoshik, the air came into their lives. She asked if what was happening wasn't great, because now they could try to make a real fire. The dwarf asked her if she wanted to try it. Sequoia used the power of the air and the strongest currents of artificially created wind. This caused the bonfire to flare up more and more by the minute. The Duke looked at the well-lit bonfire with admiration, even opening his mouth in surprise. He noticed that the color of the flame was changing from red to orange. The color is gradually lighter and has already become almost white. The dwarf noticed that this was not bad at all, looking at the result in the form of a decent column of flame. The young gentleman asked if it was possible to start forging then. The dwarf said it looked like it was already possible to melt iron. The Duke thanked those present for the work done. After all, now they will be able to extract iron and forge it, without using fossil fuels. The dwarf, Thor, turned to the gentleman, walking quickly towards him. He asked Joshua if he understood correctly that everything that was happening was just the beginning, and what he was going to do in the foreseeable future. The Duke said he had a lot of plans. In the future, he would like to establish mass production of iron and glass. But now their main priority is housing. They will have to wait for the workers for another 3 days. Sequoia asked what he was going to do now. He started saying that since there is no magic stone in Campaland, he needs a sewer and running water. This problem can be solved by laying a sewer network, but this is a large project, and concrete will be needed for it. It is necessary to discuss whether it will be possible to do in this situation only with concrete or some other additional material will be needed. A bridge was needed to deliver quartz sand. They have to design a bridge and use it to lay a water pipe. The need of the construction of a sewer system or the construction of an external wall will be a laborious job. He said that, indeed, they would need labor, but craftsmen would hardly be needed. If all residents were involved, then everything would probably be done. He said that in order to better understand how they can build it better, it would be good to make a trial model. After that, one of the subordinates offered to do this and asked the young gentleman to explain the design later, then he would help out a lot. The Duke was already preparing to continue talking. But Joshua's speech was suddenly interrupted by one of those present. The young gentleman asked what was the matter. He replied that it seemed that the concrete was not so fireproof. The Duke was very angry. He asked if the problem was with the furnace they had recently built. Garm agreed that they had built a small fire, but cracks were already visible. It would be better to brick the inside. Joshua asked the dwarf for forgiveness. He said he hadn't thought about the fire resistance of the structure. Garm hastened to reassure him. Just because concrete cannot withstand high temperatures, it does not mean that it is bad. It can be painted and then perfectly used in construction. The Duke said that, in this case, when the furnace cools down, they will immediately lay it inside with a refractory brick. The young gentleman regretfully said that it turns out he doesn't know anything, but there's nothing to be done. When they tested the concrete in the duchy, they just looked at whether it would harden or not finding what else to do in such a situation. Joshua-sama said that then he would return to the palace with Ellie. Sequoia agreed with the master's decision, but an animal suddenly appeared in the bushes, looking at everyone present with displeasure. Everyone present looked at this in fright and blocked their master's bodies. The Duke began to look around warily. The horses ran amok. Joshua stammered, repeating the question, "What is it?" Ellie shouted loudly for Mr. Joshua not to move. Sequoia said that it looked like they were facing a magical beast that decided to come and look at them. The Duke thought that magical beasts were not monsters after all. At this time, Ellie blocked Joshua's path. She shouted that he wasn't going anywhere. If something happens to Mr. Joshua, she didn't finish her thought. Sequoia seriously told the young man that it was better for him to stay here. Sequoia turned to the maid, asking if Ellie would be able to take care of Joshua and Thor with his companions. The maid exclaimed that she would take care of them even if it cost her her life. Another girl noted the large scale of the beast. Sequoia said that, apparently, despite the strength of this beast, it is not determined to harm anyone. The Duke excitedly addressed her, asking if she could handle it alone. She replied with a confident expression that she was a Knutsi. A sacred beast might be able to compete with her, but it's just magical. The one who is called the manager of the beasts cannot lose. The Duke trembled when he understood the definition of the word Knutsi in this world. He was surprised by her words. Sequoia had already moved closer to the very bushes in which the magical beast had been spotted earlier. She listened to the faint rustling in the bushes, slowly came closer and stopped when she heard what she'd been looking for a long time. Sequoia crouched down, wiggled her ears, listening even more to the faint sound of the magical beast's footsteps. Suddenly, she finally jumped into the bushes, with a furious expression on her face, and found herself face to face with the beast discussed earlier. But after her expression, eager for profit, instantly changed to a surprised one. Sequoia was very surprised and delighted. She called the beast sitting in front of her the Master. The girl returned to the courtyard. The Duke immediately asked her if she was all right now. She hastened to assure him that there were no problems. The magical beast, as expected, turned out to be a non-aggressive herbivore. Joshua asked if he was reasonable. The dwarf Thor also turned to the girl to find out what kind of beast it was in general terms. Sequoia looked up and easily said that she and the beast that everyone was initially afraid of had exchanged a few words. The girl said that this magical beast could be the master of the forest, and it had only recently encountered humans. The Duke assumed that this was not the first time the beast had encountered humans. It looks like you ran into a squad of Valtor and Runeberg. He asked a second question. If this is the owner of the forest, then he must be strong. Joshua thought to himself that it was a good thing that he hadn't ordered Valtor to hunt him that time. After all, Sequoia confirmed his guesses about the fact that they had already met him before, saying that this beast controls thunder. Joshua told the girl that this beast was a thunderbolt. She, in turn, said that she did not know the name. The Duke was happy to say that since he turned out to be a herbivore, it made their case much easier. He wanted to ask the beast for help. Joshua turned to Shoka, holding out his hand to her. He asked if she could help him. With the exception of one incident involving concrete, the forge was fully operational. From that day on, until the housing problem is solved, Yoshua-sama continued to tell the residents, Runeberg will guard the forge. Joshua decided that Valta would guard the people employed at the construction site. Aru and Ellie were engaged in negotiations with the locals at the central Oracle Square at that time. As for Joshua himself, since Sequoia snuggled very close to him and hugged him tightly, he asked her to move away. She only smiled in response and told him not to pay attention to it, because everything was fine. The Duke said that he was in charge here, but then decided not to argue with the girl on this topic, and told her to forget about it. He turned to her again about yesterday's beast. Joshua said he wanted to find his favorite food. They also needed to research materials that could replace frogs. He also wants to get some metal. She asked if he wanted to use a zipper. This is a very exciting event. Speaking of lightning, the Duke puts the value of electricity into this. Electricity will help his dream to rise to a new level. Joshua thought that if he could persuade Roriju or generate energy in some other way, he didn't have any electrical appliances. But he found a positive side to this issue. Even though it has no electrical appliances, electricity has a wide range of applications. Joshua wants to find a way to use electricity that suits this particular world. Sequoia asked what lightning could be used for, to which the Duke replied that there are many ways to use lightning for their own purposes, and was going to list them. For example, they could use it for metallization, or, for example, electrolysis. In general, there was a lot to do. The girl listened, not understanding what Joshua meant. But in the end, she said it sounded like fun. She looked at the young man eagerly. First, they decided to go to the blacksmith shop, and then check how the housing construction was progressing. Sequoia said she understood Joshua's plan. The dwarf Thor was delighted at the arrival of his master. He said that he had heard that the main character had been busy with self-discipline these 3 days, but also asked about the bridge, whether the young master was planning to build a bridge. He, in turn, said that he wanted it very much. But, as he said yesterday, first they need to sort out the housing. In the meantime, I asked you to prepare a layout. but the dwarf informed him that the layout was already ready. The Duke was surprised by the news. Tor continued that he did not have this layout with him, but he would soon send it to the estate, and also asked the young man to study this layout in the evening. Joshua instantly assumed a confident expression and agreed. The Duke said that since this is the case, Aru and Ellie planned to install a monument in the central square. Joshua asked the dwarf Tor to help them while they were dealing with the bridge. He said it sounded interesting. He asked if they were going to install the monument in the most prominent place in the city, to which the hero replied that the monument would be a symbol of the Oracle City, and they would install it in the very center of the city. The dwarf agreed, saying that he would take care of it. The dwarf noted that Thor was too impatient, but suddenly something caught the Duke's attention. Garm praised Shoka for understanding something. The Duke looked at them blankly, not understanding what they were talking about. The dwarf showed a saw-like device in his hands and said he meant it. Garm pointed out that there was another one in the next. He made it too. The Duke hurried to find the mentioned object with his eyes. There was a sword in the distance. Joshua said he looked impressive, praising Garm for the job he had done. Sequoia asked the Duke to take a closer look at him. The sword and saw glowed with a blue light, which meant that they were made of bare steel. The other weapon made by the dwarf was made of mithril. Using rare magical metals for carpenter's tools is very much in the dwarf style. That's how he got all the necessary materials earlier. Garm said that despite the resulting products, he wants more. 10 such swords and saws. The Duke decided to ask if blue steel is harder than the density of iron. The dwarf replied that blue steel was a first-class product. She cuts iron like butter. Joshua thought to himself that this was to be expected for magic metals. Sequoia said that the fact that the gentleman does not know anything about blue steel is more strange. But the Duke replied that he had not studied magic metals yet. Suddenly, another thought occurred to him. He asked those present if they could talk about blue steel, mithril, and magic metals in general. He was told that magic metal is a joint alloy of metals and mana. Mana is somewhat similar to magic power. All living beings possessed mana. It is, in a sense, energy. Mana is an integral part of their life in this world. It is literally used everywhere, in the form of magic or magical tools, such as magic lamps, combining ordinary metal with mana. It is possible to obtain various alloys with their own special qualities, Sequoia explained. She asked if all of the above was clear to the young gentleman. He replied that he was more or less in a hurry to ask a question. He was interested in what alloys, for example, could be obtained. Sequoia replied that there are 3 famous magic metals. These are mithril, blue steel, and orichalcum. The Duke was lost in his own thoughts again. According to his words and observations, he has never seen orichalcum before. If magic metals are alloys of magic and ordinary metal, then something interesting comes out. Mithril, in this case, is silver. The young man asked about what blue steel and orichalcum are. Everyone was glad that he finally understood. He finally realized that in the fantasy world, mithril is made of silver, although this is his guess. When fusing silver and magic, you will get mithril. In this case, orichalcum turns out to be gold, and blue steel is made of iron. Such conclusions were made by the gentleman. After all, until the Duke conducts an experiment, he cannot be sure of his judgments. But anyway, the young master asked Garm to tell him a little more about mithril. He was ready to answer all the Duke's questions. Joshua asked if the yards use the same furnace in which he works with iron during forging. Garm agreed. He added that mithril behaves in the same way as the primary metal. since the melting point is the same for both. The Duke drew his own conclusions based on what the dwarf had said. He said it was all clear, but there was one thing. There is definitely no silver in the soil without any impurities. It turns out that mithril also contains them, the hero asked Garm. The dwarf replied with strong disagreement. He said that mithril exists without impurities. In a sense, this metal is similar to a precious stone. The Duke decided that it was easy to melt, and it turns out to be harder than steel. Mithril, in his opinion, was an amazing metal, although it was originally a simple silver. The dwarf agreed with what his master had said, adding that mithril was both lighter and at the same time stronger than iron. It also has great magic resistance. The Duke thought that silver could not be lighter than iron because of the different densities and its decent difference. Isn't it strange, he thought, that mithril is lighter and harder than iron? Perhaps this is all a consequence of the influence of magic. The real magic was amazing. The maid asked what was so strange about it. Joshua-sama laughed it off, saying that it was nothing strange. It was just that, in his opinion, he should deepen his knowledge of magic. He will try to study it from a scientific point of view. The girl asked with interest about science. She thought it sounded interesting, and she asked the Duke to tell her more about science. The Duke assured her that without Seikoi, it would be difficult for the girl to deal with magic metals. During the experiment, he will count on her. The Duke and the girl began to explore something again. According to the Duke, this area looks like a pineapple plantation. At least they finally got to this place. Apparently, there were no signs of the killer plant in front of them. The Duke mentioned that this pineapple is the beast's favorite food. Valter had already told them that the killer plant feeds on pineapples, and he also said that the beast comes to eat this particular plant at a certain moment. The Duke continued that it was most likely definitely struck by lightning, because it is an excellent material. The girl stopped the gentleman by firmly pulling her master by the shoulder, loudly telling him to stop. Arua wanted to remind them that with the help of the wind, they must protect not only themselves, but also Mr. Joshua. They crouched down to the grass, and the girl asked if something had happened to him during this time. The Duke stared at the grass. He said he felt better because Arua was protecting him. She agreed with that. He thanked her for her cooperation, but persuasively embarrassed, asked her to get off him. They continued to live among the bushes of plants. The gentleman's attention was attracted by a berry that was lying on the ground itself. He decided to use his gift and appreciate the fruit that was directly in his hands. He was clutching a berry, wondering if it was the fruit of a killer plant. His ability showed that this fruit tasted the same as the tree poison. With the help of this fruit, the plant hunts and feeds on animals. Arura assumed that the gnawed fruit in Joshua's hands was the rest of the Thunder Beast's meal. They noticed that everything was burned down. The girl noted that, apparently, the thunderbolt flashed its lightning, attacking the killer plants. The Duke agreed with the statement, continuing to peer into the vegetation left behind. He concluded that the surface of the bushes is black and not burnt, although it is close to the center. Arura noticed a strange thing and called out to the Duke. She pointed to the spider's web and said that, despite this, it was still intact and had not burned down. The Duke turned to the girl with admiration and said that perhaps the spider had started a new web, and they should have collected it. At this time, he will quickly manage the shrubbery. He continued to stare at the tree in front of him and wondered how this could be. But with a sinister grin, Joshua understood what was the matter. The necessary realization came to him. He asked Arua if the tree wasn't exactly like that. Joshua concluded that wood fiber and resin are actually good insulators. Arua, not hiding her own curiosity, watched the heated one and asked about the meaning of the word insulator. I asked if he had a lightning substance under his references above. She assumed it was some kind of magic metal or magic fiber. She decided that they were using lightning-resistant substances in order to weave magic fibers. A high level of magical skill was needed. Even if it exists, it shouldn't be like this. If the production is complex and the material is precious, then it can only be used here. First of all, you need to produce Kagakutoshi. Arua asked the pleased Duke to explain the existence of the isolation ward. Joshua hastened to apologize, starting to explain the course of his thoughts to the girl. He said that the insulator and lightning protection are different by themselves. Joshua then asked her to explain about lightning protection, continuing. He said that lightning is the same as a flash. Everything that sparkles he personally calls electricity. Insulators, in turn, indicate those substances that block electricity. Arura noticed that all this was not in order to stop, but in order to turn it off. The Duke agreed that, in principle, it is already possible to get this insulating substance in Kagakutoshi, which is obviously glass. Arura didn't understand what it was. She thought that glass armor was a very difficult thing to do. It will not be used just like that, even if Garm or Tor will work with it. Therefore, they will make an insulator from the fibers and resin of this shrub. Since paper can be made from fibers, and resin can later be applied to armor, with the help of this tree, it is possible to acquire the compliance of lightning after a while, the Duke noticed. Arura advised him to be careful, because resistance to lightning is another thing, in her opinion. This tree just doesn't conduct electricity, but at a sufficiently high temperature, it will still burn. Arura's expression became thoughtful. The Duke admitted that he still does not understand what is happening. He said that resistance to lightning implies protection from all kinds of lightning, whether it's magic or still a natural phenomenon. Joshua continued and talked about how clean electricity has protection, but he is absolutely not sure about thunder breathing. However, the interaction of heat and lightning is definitely the end. Arura said that, in principle, it's not about trying to figure out if it's a thunderous beast, or maybe it's just Arura's excited dream at all. She assured Joshua that she would carefully double-check everything once again using her magical abilities. She cut down this magical protective tree for the young man. The Duke calmly hugged the trunk of the tree with admiration, saying that now they would not be able to be hit by an electric current in this way. But there was one more thing to ask Garm for. At this time, the Duke suggested that Arua hurry up and leave here before the thunderbolt came yet. The girl offered to take a couple more things to the gentleman. Joshua cautiously said that one would be more than enough for him. After all, the trees are absolutely not soft. The hero, returning back to the yard to the builders, immediately noticed a brand new lightning rod standing on the roof of the building. Dwarf Garm said that a bronze thread should be wound on the iron pole in the future. He assured the gentleman that after lunch, he could come for him. Joshua exclaimed in surprise at what the dwarf said. He hurried to thank the masters for doing it in such a short time and exclaimed that it was really very fast. He also said that then you need to ask the Torah to apply the resin obtained from the trunk of the lightning tree he brought. The dwarf Thor said that he realized that if he applied resin obtained from this tree, things would stop conducting electricity in the future. The Duke also wanted to ask him to do something light, but at the same time, something that can cover the whole body. The dwarf told Joshua to rely on him. He thinks a hooded cape would be perfect, and asked how much Joshua needed. He replied that he would need 3 such capes. The dwarf Thor nodded understandingly in response to this and said that he understood his decree. The Duke was satisfied, because the lightning rod would be able to protect them from a lightning strike, and the insulating coating from the possible consequences of a lightning strike. Now they are fully prepared to meet with Roriju. Joshua turned to Valtor and asked him about the current situation in the city. Valtor assured the gentleman that everything had been calm for the past few days. Under his management, the residents began to work as one. The hero replied that since there were no disagreements, it was fine. He also asked about external threats, whether something threatens their city. Valtor replied emphatically that he did not. He said it would be good if a wild boar appeared. At least he hunted it. The Duke replied that if he was free, then, based on his thoughts, he would agree to accompany him for a short walk. Joshua said that they were going to meet with Reiju, as they were on full alert. Valtor said it was great, it was good news for him, and he would definitely go with them. The Duke also added that another companion would join them, as they would need physical strength at this meeting. They'll wait for him at the forge. The companion who joined them was a huge beast man. He looked like a cat. He also had strong arms and sharp fangs, which are characteristic of predators. His gaze was confident and dangerous. Joshua hurried to introduce the newcomer. He assured the others that he wasn't scary at all. His name is Garuga, and he was also an adventurer in the past. The hero turned to him with the words that maybe he already knows him, but still wants to introduce himself. His name is Joshua, and he runs the duchy. Valtor apologized for his friend, saying that maybe you couldn't tell from him. But Garuga got very excited and hurried to push him in the back. This stunned Joshua, and he reproachfully called out to Valtor. Garuga bowed respectfully to the Duke and apologized again for his own oversight. The former researcher introduced himself directly to the gentleman. He repeated that his name was Garuga and, as a former adventurer, he did not know how to address him. Joshua assured him that he absolutely does not need any kind of formalities and asks him to treat his food like a doctor. He shook hands with the former adventurer despite Garuga's confused expression. Sequoia asked if they were done with the greetings, and hurried to introduce herself, and then the dwarf Garm. Garm hurried to ask Joshua if the lightning rod was working properly, to which the Duke was surprised to ask if he had taken him to the construction site. He replied that they would check everything now. In his opinion, the lightning rod looked great. Sequoia asked if a metal rod was needed for the timing belt. In addition, she added, she had heard that the tip needed to be sharpened and asked if they had done these actions. Joshua said that everything was done correctly. The most important step was to wind the bronze wire. Everyone hopes it will be fun. Valtor asked if they would take the lightning rod with them. The Duke agreed, and also asked not to forget about capes resistant to electricity. With them, even in contact with lightning, an electric shock can be avoided. Since their opponent is Roriju, they must take all necessary measures. The hero wondered how Garuga was carrying a heavy lightning rod all this time. How does his body allow him to do this and still work? The heroes were on the spot and have not yet seen Reiju. Sequoia said she hoped they would be lucky to meet him. All the members of the research team waited a long time for the guest, but he never came. The Duke thought that this was to be expected, since they had not found any traces of him yesterday either. He can't be in one place all the time. The Duke decided to ask Shoko something and offer her an idea that had recently popped into his head. He asked if they could somehow use her abilities to attract the attention of this thunder beast. She replied to the Duke that she would try, The girl asked if he wanted them to find a place where Roiju lived. She also said that they could find him and try to make friends. If he feels in danger in his own nest, then she does not know what they will do in this case. Suddenly, the young gentleman heard a barely noticeable rustle in the bushes and stared at them intently. The main character looks in front of him in surprise and wonders if it's Reiju. A large shrub turns out to be in front of him, and he realizes that this is a predatory plant. Suddenly, he realizes the smell that this plant produces. He begins to feel sleepy because of the sweet aroma. Joshua feels very good when he inhales it. Sequoia, standing next to him, tries to bring the sleeping hero to his senses and tells him that it is luring him. One of the girls says that his food is here and suggests waiting for Reiju himself. In the end, the guys decide to wait for him for an hour, and if he does not appear, ask him to cut down this predatory plant in order to take it with him and study its properties. After a while, the guys hear the crunching of branches and loud stomping. A large monster appears in front of the team, which look menacing. The main character looks at him with fright and realizes that it is him. Memories of what Reiju looks like pop up in his head. Its length is about 5 meters, and its body is covered with pale lightning. Joshua is more than sure that the monster in front of him is Reiju. The whole group of people looks at the big monster in front of them in disbelief. Sequoia steps forward, leaving his friends behind him. The girl says she will talk to him. The main character tells her that all hope is in her. Sequoia looks at Roiju with his hands on his hips. The young girl looks very confident. With a smile on her face, Kitsune asks her friends to rely on her. For a while, the monster and Sequoia freeze in one place, looking into each other's eyes. At this moment, there is an obvious tension on Joshua's face. He doesn't hear what they're talking about and worries about whether everything is okay. Suddenly, the girl turns to face him and informs him that, depending on the details, he will fulfill his request. However, she immediately adds that he wants to eat first. The guy exhales in relief to himself and thinks that he looks scary, but it's actually a good beast. Joshua agrees with Roiju, but asked him to leave him a berry because he wants to study it. He agrees, and Sequoia asks about his request. Suddenly, the main character shouts with enthusiasm in his voice that he would like the monster to hit the lightning rod with the strongest attack. The girl remembers to herself what he is talking about and imagines a lightning rod in her head. Sequoia doesn't understand why he needs it, but it sounds interesting to her. The main character convinces her that she will like it, and a smile blooms on the girl's face. After a few seconds, she turns back and says that Rizdi doesn't mind. Joshua exclaims joyfully. The guy turns to Valtor and Garuga and asks them to prepare a lightning rod. They follow Joshua's orders without hesitation. The main character also tells them that they need a place where there are no tall trees. After a while, they find a similar place on a large plain. The guy says it's a good place and it'll do. He orders Garuga to put up a lightning rod. He proceeds to execute the order without any questions. After the swing, Garuga impresses the structure into the ground with all his strength, driving it deep into the soil. The man asks Joshua if he did the right thing. The guy looks at it with a surprised look and thanks him. The main character notifies the girl that everything is ready for them. Sequoia turns in his direction and says that he has already finished too. Roju approaches the pillar, but stops. Suddenly, Sequoia grunts in disbelief. The girl turns to Joshua and tells the guy that the monster has another question. Sequoia asks the main character how strong the attack should be. The main character enthusiastically says that this should be the strongest attack. His eyebrows are slightly furrowed, but his face expresses a smile. He asks the monster to give his best. Roriju growls loudly, and then the monster attacks with all its might with a huge electric charge, the lightning rod created by the guys. The ground next to the pillar begins to smoke, and it is covered with small lightning. The main character covers his face with his hand, but continues to observe the behavior of the lightning rod. When the attack stops and smoke begins to emanate from the pillar, Joshua smiles, glad that everything worked out for them. Garuga complains that it was loud, and Sequoia corrects him and says that they asked for it themselves. The guy asks if he was able to generate enough energy, but the girl asks him again, uncomprehendingly. The main character corrects himself and says that he will explain it later if necessary. The girl looks at him with admiration and wonders if this is his science. He answers her question positively. The main character asks Sequoia to convey his gratitude to Roriju for his help in attacking the lightning rod and for allowing him to study those berries too. Suddenly, the main character remembers something and asks his comrades if anyone has anything metallic. The guys ask him again, and Sequoia finds a small metal tube in his possession. He thanked her. Joshua takes a metal tube and runs it over the lightning rod. He exclaims joyfully and says that he has succeeded. Shakui is surprised to ask him if it is a magnet, and Joshua says that the lightning of Roriju has magnetized the metal rod. Admiration appears in the girl's eyes, and she looks at it with awe. Sequoia is surprised that metal has become a magnet with the help of lightning, and says that this is different from magic. Kitsune finds science interesting. After a while, all his friends surround him in a semicircle and are surprised by the words of the main character about creating electricity. There is a lack of understanding on their faces. Joshua explains to them what it means to generate energy and that electricity has many uses: lighting, water purification, gilding. He also mentions that with the help of electricity, you can move objects. Sequoia compares electricity to mana and says that it is also universal. Joshua says that he has heard that mana is capable of anything if he learns the right technique. The guy explains to them that electricity obeys the laws of science. Garm asks him to explain in more detail. The main character does not refuse the request and says that a magnet and a coil are needed to get electricity. With the help of Raiju, they got a magnet, and they made the coil last time. The guy asks if they still have a copper wire and says that they need to twist it. Why apply resin and the coil will be ready? Gorm asks him again. The main character explains that he is a copper wire that conducts electricity well, but resin does not. A wire coated with resin will not pass electricity. This way it can be controlled. Shukoi finally gets what the guy is talking about, and she realizes that the resin-coated copper wire serves as a way to move the received electricity. Now she understands everything. The main character returns to getting electricity and says that everything is very simple. They need to rotate the magnet between two coils that are placed to the left and right of the magnet. Gorm says the mechanism is simple and straightforward, and they need to make another turbine, place the coil, and rotate the magnet. The main character tells the man that he is absolutely right. However, he mentions that something needs to be noted. It is necessary to change the proportions of the gears, as they do not rotate well. To do this, they will need Joshua's help. He asks him what he thinks about the layout of the Torah. The guy agrees with the man, but he wants the manufacture of other tools to be a priority, because he believes that preparing everything for home is the most important thing. Garm understands that they need to build a bridge. Joshua asks the man to make sure that the main work will take 3 months, because otherwise they will have to wait for spring. Garm calms the main character down and says it won't take that long. He jokingly explains this by saying that they have their duke. At the same time, in the settlement, Ellie, Ruru, and the rest of the residents are laughing contentedly. Ellie looks in front of her and says it's great. The girls are happy that their creation in the form of a statue is finally ready. After a while, the main character and his companions arrive back in the city, which is bustling with life. In the main square, many people follow the Duke with their eyes. The guy is happy that the construction is progressing well. A little further on, two girls and a statue covered with a cloth appear in front of the Duke. They're glad that Joshua has arrived. The guy looks at the structure in surprise. Ellie informs him that they have installed the symbol of the city, and the girls ask to see it. The main character is confronted by his own statue. Joshua immediately notices the petite and fragile body. He also catches the eye with refined shoulders, completely unsuitable for a man. The Duke is horrified that it is him. Ellie reverently tells him that, speaking of the oracle symbol, there is nothing more appropriate than Mr. Joshua. The girl believes that the statue of Joshua is much better than the statue of God. The main character turns around and looks around. Behind him, he finds people looking at his statue in awe and thanking it. Joshua is amazed that they are now praying. One man from the crowd gives glory to Mr. Joshua. A large number of people surround the statue and pray at it. The guy wants to forget about this attack of awe for a while. At the moment, the construction of a residential and commercial area is progressing successfully. In the agricultural area, in addition to cassava, they began to grow fruits, vegetables, and sweet potatoes. Also, with the help of Seikoi, they have achieved success in the production of light bulbs. While everything is progressing successfully, the main character came up with an idea. Sequoia looks at the guy in surprise and is amazed that he wants to create magic stones from electricity. The Duke explains to her that in order to create mana from electricity and store it, he wants to create magic stones. The main character is interested in her opinion on this matter. The girl thinks about it and says that she doesn't think it's possible. He argues that Reiju used mana to create lightning, or in other words, electricity, and suggests that mana can also be created from electricity. However, the girl stops his speech by interrupting the guy. Kitsune points his finger at him and says that he is missing one important detail. The main character looks at her in surprise and asks what detail he might be missing. Shokoya explains to him that mana is usually inside the body, and Roiju uses the mana accumulated in his body, and electricity is converted from the accumulated mana. The guy's eyebrows frown at the girl's words and says that the accumulation of electricity is a mechanism similar to a battery, and although the main character has a general idea about batteries, he does not know how to make them. He also says that most likely they will need a catalyst to transform electricity into mana. The girl exhales heavily and complains that he is using scientific terms again. Shokoi explains to him that the point is that the Raiju use something like intermediaries in their body in order to transform mana into lightning. Joshua doesn't think he's using a catalyst, but he thinks they'll definitely need it. She talks about the catalyst, and he wonders how to make it for them. Suddenly, someone from the outside asks them if they want to make a battery. The main character turns around in amazement at an extraneous voice that sounded behind him earlier and asked about the batteries. He wonders what it could be. In front of the surprise guy, there is a little penguin who asks the guy from what period he is. Bird begins to list periods in the history of Japan, and then comes to the conclusion that the guy is definitely from the post-war period. The main character exclaims in surprise because the penguin is talking. The animal is happy that he understands Japanese and says that other people speak a language he does not know, and that makes him lonely. Joshua is amazed to ask the penguin if he was Japanese in a previous life. The girl does not understand what her friend is talking about. The penguin answers his question positively. However, the animal wonders why he became a penguin and does not understand the reason for this. Joshua arrives at a loss from the words of a bird that complains about another world. Suddenly, Sequoia turns to Joshua. The girl is surprised that he is talking to a strange creature. The main character says that it knows how to talk quite well. The penguin corrects him and says his name is Sojiro. The guy brings it to the girl. The penguin returns to the old topic of conversation and asks the guys if they need a battery. Joshua agrees with him. Sojiro says that there is nothing complicated about this, and if the charging efficiency is not taken into account, then he is ready to help. The main character understands that the penguin is clearly familiar with science, but a bad feeling arises inside him. However, the guy throws him away, and with a smile on his face, tells the countryman that he will be very grateful for his help, and will definitely pay. Sojiro asks Joshua if he really thinks that penguins need money. The main character understands the animal perfectly. Bird says he has 2 conditions and needs food and shelter. He also expresses a desire to learn magic. Joshua turns to his girlfriend and says that he wants to study magic, but does not understand their language. The guy asks Shokoi what they should do. She confidently asks him to rely on her. The girl looks directly at the penguin with a smile on her face. The main character asks her what she is going to do. She explains to him that she will communicate with the penguin the same way she communicated with Raiju. A silent dialogue begins between Sojiro and Shoka, which only they understand. In an instant, both the girl and the penguin raise their hands up and are very happy about someone. Joshua wonders what they are talking about. The main character and Sequoia introduce Aruru to their new friend in the form of a penguin. Joshua explains to Ellie that Sojiro needs fish, and the girl immediately executes the order, fishing the fish out of the water with her bare hands. The girl's about to go home, but Rumberg blocks her way. The man asks the girl if she plans to continue serving her master. Ellie answers without a doubt and says that taking care of Mr. Happiness is for her. The butler says he understands her desire to serve her master. This man mentions that the girl is the 3rd daughter of Baron Newman, but Joshua does not know about it. He asks her if she should be here. Rumberg says she's doing a great job with the power of her gift, and as the daughter of a baron, she has nothing to be ashamed of. He also believes that the circumstances are different now from when Joshua was in the capital. The men assume that the baron is worried about her. The girl lowers her head a little shyly and explains to the butler that she thought about meeting her father, but now she just wants to be Ellie. The man is silent in response to her words. Ellie tells him that he taught her how to use her gift. She also received great support, and because of this, she feels great joy serving Joshua. The man asks her if she intends to reveal the whole truth. Ellie explains that she is scared because she is afraid that the gentleman will no longer look at her as before. Rumber calms her down and says that Joshua will not change his mind about her. The man also wants to tell him the truth about the other side. The fillers recall that his predecessor, Alfred, told him about the responsibilities of the reverse side and the secret of protecting Mr. Joshua. Now that Joshua has been exiled, the man thinks it would be better to tell him everything. The girl is a little confused and says that the downside is the abilities that the 4 of them possess. Rumberg says that because of the secret of protecting the master, they hid their abilities from him. Ellie cuts him off with a loud shout. The girl tearfully turns to him with a request. She starts talking about her ability of absolute strength and asks the man to keep it a secret. The man looks at her in amazement. The butler does not resist her, saying that he intends to reveal the truth only about his abilities and Valtor's abilities, in which case the maids will have nothing to do with it. The girl stares intently at the man. Ellie realizes that someday the time will come, and she too will have to reveal the truth. The Baron's daughter assumes that Ururu will want it too. The butler looks at her warmly and suggests in this case, when the time comes, everyone should apologize and tell the master the truth. Ellie agrees with him. After a while, the action is transferred to the main character's office. Joshua and Sojiro are sprawled on a table, sleeping on a pile of various scribbled papers. The guy barely raises his head and sees a sleeping Shoka in front of him. Suddenly, someone knocks on the office door. A voice from behind the door says that a visitor has come to Joshua and asks if he can be invited to him. The main character sleepily rubs his eyes and is surprised by the report in the morning, but invites a guest. The main character again hears an extraneous sound and tells himself that he has already heard this crying somewhere. Joshua yawns, covering his face with his hand. When they enter the room, his eyes widen in surprise. The girl who entered apologizes for waiting. The main character is confronted by his old acquaintance, the daughter of Count Gatterman, Charlotte. The girl is glad to see the main character again and hope that he is in good health. Joshua is happy to receive the guest and responds in kind. The guy says that when he was in the county, she always took care of him. However, he is concerned about the reason for her arrival and asks if something happened. Cherry anxiously explains to him that she has learned that His Excellency is in a difficult situation. The girl sincerely says that she could not just sit idly by. The main character is surprised that she came to find out about the situation. The guy is a little perplexed, but calms down an old friend and says that they are doing well and they are coping. The girl excitedly shouts that if His Excellency descends, any backwater will turn into a magnificent city in the blink of an eye. The main character is a little embarrassed by her words and looks at her in disbelief, speechless. The girl, she is against it, continues her stormy speech. The Count's daughter explains to him that this is why she is here. After a moment, the girl takes out of her bag, hidden on her hip, a small bottle, half filled with milk. Joshua looks at her in amazement. He realizes that the liquid in the bottle is milk and exclaims in surprise about it. The girl confirms his words and says that she also brought the cow. She asks you to entrust the care of him to her, because every morning she will deliver fresh milk to him. The main character is still surprised, but accepts a gift from a friend. Joshua expresses his surprise at the girl's words that she will come here every morning. He asks her about her possessions. The girl bends down in front of him in a small bow and asks the main character not to worry. Charlotte explains to Joshua that she passed everything on to her younger brother. The girl purses her lower lip a little sheepishly, but in the end, she dares to say what she intended. Charlotte puts her hand on his chest and asks him to let her become his subordinate. Charlotte sincerely asks the master to let her serve him. The main character closes his eyes in embarrassment and thinks to himself that he expected this. He reflects that Charlotte is an excellent leader with incredible abilities to implement certain projects. During the time when he lived in the duchy, she helped him out a lot. However, there is one catch. Joshua thinks that she is a workaholic. The main character recalls the times when he was in the duchy. The girl constantly brought him milk. She claimed that thanks to this, he would have strength for the rest of the day. and Joshua was at a loss, not daring to refuse or resist her. Charlotte was filling him up with a lot of work, putting a huge stack of papers on the table in front of him. The girl always had milk and work in the first place. She believed that milk gave him the strength to work without a break. The main character remembers this with panic and thinks that he can't even count how many times it has been repeated. Currently, the girl is loudly saying that she understands that she is not good enough to serve him, but she asks him to find a place for her in his domain because she wants to help him in any way she can. The Roomberg watching this scene is crying, wiping his face with a handkerchief. The man was very touched by the girl's devotion to her master. The main character tensely closes his eyes and begins to think about this situation. Joshua understands that he must pull himself together because his goal is to ensure the prosperity of the Oracle in 3 years, then leave all the worries to his successor and live carefree. The guy immediately opens the jar and drinks the milk in one gulp. The guy understands that with such a responsible girl as Charlotte, he will become much closer to the implementation of his plan. The main character wipes his mouth with his hand and says with a smile on his face that he is counting on Charlotte. The girl responds to Joshua, who agreed to accept her, with the same sweet smile and with sincerity in her voice, thanking him for this. The main character himself notices that she is, as always, cheerful. The action is postponed for some time later. His subordinates gathered in the Count's office. Joshua sincerely thanks everyone for coming and asks them to sit down. He suggests starting a meeting about the gentrification of the city. The main character turns to Runberg and asks him if he could tell him how the development of the districts is progressing. He is happy to share information, fulfilling the order. The man tells everyone that the construction of residential areas is progressing according to plan, and they have already started the construction of insula. The guy asks him when people will be able to move into the house. Rumberg regretfully explains to the main character that he cannot say anything for sure, since new people are staying in their lands with each new day. However, the butler believed that it will not take long if they connect the newcomers to the construction. Joshua thinks about it and says it's good, because keeping people alive is their primary task. Joshua will offer his subordinates only 5 insulates for now, since this should be enough even if more people come to them. He also believes that 5 single-story shops should also be enough. He says that the insula are quite simple to build, and he believes that 3 floors with 10 rooms on each will be enough for them. Thanks to such multi-story residential buildings, over 200 people will get a roof over their heads. In addition, the main character, with a smile on his face and with the best intentions, offers to build private houses designed by the brigade for people with families. Rumberg is touched by the fact that he is striving to reduce the number of homeless people as quickly as possible and begins to cry. The butler says that Joshua is very kind, and his proposal touched him to the core. The guy explains this by saying that such an exit is very practical. He believes that they will be able to adapt the insula built in the shopping area for hotels. His subordinates happily follow his orders and shout that they will finish the construction within 10 days. Joshua says that they don't need to rush so much because they have an excellent foreman, and they can leave the leadership to him. The butler does not argue with the guy, but asks him if he knows that Mr. Paul is the foreman. The young man answers the subordinate's question positively. Joshua asks him to invite the foreman to him, as he believes that his opinion on the arrangement of the city will not be superfluous. The butler obeys the order. The main character argues that they should take measures to protect the townspeople from such external enemies as beasts or monsters. The man tells him that he took this into account. Walter asks the Duke if he offers to build observation posts. The main character asks him if he can do this without the help of a carpenter. He explains to him that there are ex-military and adventurers in their ranks so that they can take care of it. Joshua is glad to be able to rely on him and says that they should not worry about strengthening security measures yet. Suddenly, Joshua asks Valtor if he could assemble hunting parties and lead them. The man answers without hesitation that there is no problem, but clarifies about the protection of the city. The guy explains that Runberg will replace him. Joshua says that he would like to put Paul in charge of the project, as well as find someone to head the security post. He asks Valtor if he has any ideas. He advises his friends to this post. The guy talks about his proposal and thinks that Garuga is the same warrior with the head of a leopard, and it seems that he is not particularly talkative and is not very good at ruling people. Joshua is confident that he will not refuse the request. However, he believes that doing work that is different from what he did before can lead to stress and decreased efficiency. The guy wants to send him hunting and realizes that only Richmond is left. Suddenly, Runberg says Richmond's name. The main character looks at him in surprise and then asks the butler if he knows him. The man answers in the negative and says that he is not sure that they are talking about the same person. Joshua asks Valtor, "What can he tell you about him?" The man hesitates a little, but says that he dresses very unusually. He also notes that he sounds like a middle-aged man. The main character is surprised and says that he even became somehow interested. He asks the man if he could invite him to my place tomorrow. Joshua thinks it would be good if it were the same Richmond Runberg's acquaintance. Then he moves on to another topic of discussion and asks Ellie and Aru how things are going with the fields and the town square. Ellie abruptly raises her hand up and says that she will tell you everything now. The girl tells with reverence that every morning the inhabitants of their wonderful city gather to admire his statue. She says it's a work of art. The main character is a little perplexed because of her words and explains to the girl that he did not mean this. The guy wants to end this conversation as soon as possible and change the subject, and therefore asks Aru about the fields. The girl explains that everything is fine, and thanks to the large number of wells, they do not need to worry about watering. She also mentions that they started planting crops other than cassava. Joshua believes that farming is quite a difficult task, so he will try to put a channel through the field as soon as possible. Ellie blushes a little and is surprised that he thought everything through in advance. The guy says that they should quit the city as soon as possible, and for this it is necessary to prepare the fields for agriculture faster. But he is afraid that if they plant crops in the fields, they may be destroyed when creating a canal. The girl with a serious face says that she understood him, and in this case they will protect the areas where the future water channels will run. The main character sincerely thanks her. The main character also believes that land ownership is developing rapidly. But in addition, it is also necessary to think about animal husbandry. So the guy calls Charlie. The girl responds immediately. He asks her if she heard what they were talking about. Joshua wants to entrust her with the control of food products. The guy asks her to team up with Valtor and find plants that they can grow in their fields. The main character instructs her to deal with all the issues of controlling the self-sufficiency of the city with food. The guy looks at her with a warm look. The girl exclaims enthusiastically, obeying the order. Joshua rejoices at her reaction, calling her a workaholic, but reminds himself that he should not forget about the lack of human resources in other areas. The guy says that this is not all, and he would like to entrust her with control over the production of basic necessities, according to the type of fabric and paper. The girl needs to find people. He advises her to consult with experts from other industries. The girl looks at him with admiration and enthusiastically shouts that she can't wait to do it. The guy is at a loss again, and thinks that even he would droop while doing this. He asks her not to overdo it. The main character instructed Ellie to cooperate with Charlie, and Aru to accompany him. While he is engaged in the creation of the battery, Sojiro asks the guy if he is going to create a rechargeable energy source. The main character answers his question positively and asks the penguin if it is possible to use the battery as a replacement for magic stones. He thinks about his words. Penguin advises using plastic to create a battery, but since it will be difficult to find, he is going to limit himself to glass. He's going to use lead and dilute sulfuric acid. He wants to make the wire out of copper and resin. The guy thinks about the fact that they will need lead and sulfuric acid. Sojiro asks Joshua if he can find it. The guy's eyebrows come down to the bridge of his nose. He thinks that they may have mined lead earlier. Joshua says that they have mined many different minerals and asks the penguin and Shoka to check them and tell if there is lead among them. It's a piece of cake for a penguin. However, Sojiro asks the main character about sulfuric acid. Joshua looks at his new friend a little in disbelief and repeats his words about acid. The main character says that he doesn't have a single idea how to create it. Penguin says that perhaps they can get it using sulfur and nitrogen, because sulfur can be obtained from sulfides. The guy repeats his words about nitrogen and says that they will need to look for nitrogen. Aru looks at the two of them in surprise. Sojiro folds his arms over his chest and says wisely that sulfur and nitrogen are also minerals for making gunpowder. The main character responds by saying that so far, they don't really need gunpowder. Sojiro goes on to say that potassium nitrate is a water-soluble substance, and it is also an important nutrient absorbed by plants from the soil. He suggests finding it everywhere in small quantities. The guy asks him if they should start searching from arid areas and says that as far as he understands, potassium nitrate gets into the soil through animal excrement. The penguin confirms his guess and says that they could use the old soldier's method of obtaining sulfur, but Sojiro thinks it will take a long time. The penguin told him to try to find saltpeter if possible. The young man agrees. He also wants to talk to Shoka and Penguin about two more things. They were ready to listen to what he had to say. The first thing he wants to talk about is rubber, which they have been searching for recently. Penguin agrees that this is an indispensable material. Sequoia looks at him with displeasure. The main character goes on to say that he wanted them to think about a way to create water treatment equipment. Sojiro agrees that this is an important task and will try to develop it as early as possible. Sequoia is unhappy. Suddenly, the girl who was listening to the penguin and the guy was silent before explodes with anger and cuts off the guy's gratitude with one hand, gagging him, and with the other hand closes the penguin's beak. Sequoia throws his head high up. Kitsune is very angry at the two friends and, with fury in her voice, urges the main character to stop keeping secrets with Sojiro. Both the penguin and the guy wince in pain. The girl is a little embarrassed by the fact that the guy's lips are red, but continues to frown. He apologizes and offers to tell her everything from the beginning. But in simpler words, the guy touches his lips with his hand. The main character turns to Aru with a smile on his face and asks the girl if she can listen too. She looks down a little embarrassed and says that she is very stupid. Joshua disagrees with her and says that if they are going to create water treatment equipment, then he will need to explain the principle of operation to other people. So he would like her to listen to him too. She agrees with him. Pauline smiles back at her and begins to explain the principle of operation of the water treatment equipment. Joshua asks the girl to imagine the fish that swim in the lake and then says that algae also grow there. Fish eat these algae and defecate into the water. Subsequently, these feces enter the water, decompose, and the algae absorb these feces, which makes them grow. Sequoia notes that this is a natural process. The guy agrees with her in part and says that this decomposition of feces does not happen by itself, and they decompose thanks to small creatures that feed on feces. The girl is surprised by this. Now the guy wants to talk about dirty water and intelligently explains to the girls that these little creatures feed on dirty water in the same way as feces, decomposing this dirt. Sequoia thoughtfully rubs her chin and says that she understands everything. However, suddenly a thought comes to her mind, and she asks the guy if these little creatures breathe in the same way as fish. The guy agrees with her statement and says that dirty water contains a large amount of food for these little creatures. And if they want to increase their number, they need to provide them with oxygen. The girl says she understood the principle and that he wants to add air to the water to mix these creatures with water. The guy says that he did not expect less from her and that they will be able to clean dirty water. Joshua explains that by cleaning the dirty water and leaving the aeration process, they will get dirt that can be mixed with the ground. The dirt remaining after filtration will be very rich in useful substances. And during the repeated process, they will be able to decompose the dirt into smaller particles. In this way, they will be able to get a very useful mixture that can be used as fertilizers, and all thanks to the high content of nitrates. Next, the main character looks at Aurora and asks the girl if she understood his explanation. She puts her head down a little thoughtfully and says that she realized that the little creatures were eating and the water was getting clean. The guy says that she's right, and that's why they need a device so that these little creatures can breathe. That's what he wants to ask the penguin for. Aruro says with a smile on her face that she understood him. Penguin and Sequoia studied metal samples, and they and Aru went to the south of the capital. The main character sighs heavily. He and Aru are riding along a deserted road on a horse. Joshua says that Valtor was right, and this is a very arid area. The guy also says that despite the fact that there are vast forests in the east, survival here is an extremely difficult task. A guy and a girl are looking into the distance. There are mountain ranges in the north of the Rubicon River. He thinks about the local area and thinks that they probably have a big impact on the local climate. He thinks that it is difficult to find vegetation in arid areas here. He had heard that if they walked a few dozen kilometers from the border village, they would end up in a remote area. Aru also notes that the area is very empty. The main character dejectedly agrees with her. The girl turns her head towards Joshua and wonders if they will find nitrogen here. The guy sadly looks away from her and says he doesn't know. Joshua explains to her that saltpeter is found only in dry form, so he thought that the chance of finding it here would be much higher. Suddenly, a flock of birds flies up behind them, scaring the guy. The main character looks after the flying birds and notices that these birds look like vultures. Aruru is also watching the birds take off, but with different thoughts. She wants to eat. Joshua suddenly exclaims loudly. The guy is scared that the birds are targeting them. However, the girl calms him down and says that they will eat them. Aru asks him if he likes poultry meat. The main character believes that this is not worth doing. He thinks about birds for a long time, and then an idea flashes through his head. He tells the girl that he has remembered something, and, if he is not mistaken, there is a cliff to the west. Joshua suggests going there tomorrow. The very next day, The main character and his two assistants find themselves on a large cliff. The girl with the light in her eyes covers her eyes from the sun and examines the landscape of the area, exclaiming loudly. The guy is holding a rope tightly in his hands, which is tied to the girl's torso. He asks her not to bend over because he's afraid that she will fall. Sequoia wonders how she'll be able to look inside if she doesn't bend over. The girl asks the main character if he thinks they can find saltpeter here. He responds positively with uncertainty in his voice and says that there may be some caves in this cliff. He explains to her that saltpeter is a solidified substance obtained by decomposing organic substances, like animal feces. Joshua assumes that saltpeter should be everywhere, but this is not the case at all. The girl is surprised. She suggests that this is because saltpeter is easily dissolved by water and absorbed by plants. The guy confirms her guess and says that's why he thought it would be nice to look for her in arid areas. Sequoia says that the climatic conditions meet their requirements, and perhaps they led to the creation of such a massive split in the earth. She's leaning towards a split. The guy thought about it too. He says there's no way they'll be able to verify this until they study the sample, which is why he'd like to check if there are caves in this cliff. Suddenly, the girl looks at the young man with surprise and says with admiration that sometimes he really surprises her. She suggests that this may be the lair of a flying dragon. The main character is very surprised by her words about the dragon. It makes him stutter a little. Joshua believes that they exist. The guy thought that birds or some kind of bats lived here. However, he says that if you think about it, dragons really prefer deeper cliffs. The girl says that the amount of feces they produce will indeed exceed the production of the dragon. Sequoia, with a slight sneer, calls Joshua ahead and thanks the guy for his conclusions. The main character is a little angry at her, but with a smile on his face, he asks her forgiveness for the fact that he has only a head of useful things. Joshua holds a rope in his hand and says that despite the fact that they have a strong rope with them, it is still dangerous to use it. Suddenly, Aruru, who is standing behind the guy, turns to him. The girl makes a quick dash for the edge of the cliff. She tells the startled guy that she can handle it and asks him to rely on her. Aru jumps down into a crack in the ground without hesitation. It takes a while for the main character to realize what his subordinate has done. His face is distorted with horror, and he shouts the girl's name loudly, amazed at her desperate leap into the unknown. Joshua falls to the ground and asks what he should do, because Aru jumped into the cliff. Sequoia watches his panic with a calm face. The girl tries to calm him down, but she can't. Kitsune explains to him that she is a cat girl, which is why climbing walls is easier for her. The guy asks if that means she's okay. Shoke doesn't worry about her and says it would be much scarier if he jumped down there. The guy, who arrives at a loss from what is happening, comes closer to the cliff and begins to quickly turn his head, trying to find his girlfriend with his eyes. Suddenly, he hears Aru calling out to him. A guy sees a girl jumping. She calmly lands on the ground next to him. Joshua excitedly runs to her and says he was worried. Aru laughs and reminds him that she is a cat, so he shouldn't have worried. The main character is very glad that she is okay. The girl just laughs in response to his excitement. She informs him that there's one cave above and two below, and all these are cave systems. The main character sincerely praises the girl, to which she laughs. Joshua begins to think about the 3 caves that Aru discovered. Suddenly, Sequoia offers to inspect them. The action is carried forward for some time when 3 young people slowly walk down the cliff. Joshua is shouting very loudly about what's high up here. Sequoia tells him to shut up while Aru finds the entrance to the cave. The main character in fear, asks the girls to enter the cave faster, to which Sequoia looks at him in disbelief and says that he is very noisy. Joshua turns his attention to the abyss of the gorge and loses consciousness. To the darkness, the guy hears the girls arguing about who will kiss him, as one of them has heard that a kiss helps a lot in such situations. When he opens his eyes, Aru asks Sequoia why she wants it so much. Joshua abruptly regains consciousness and sees two girls in front of him. Aru asks him if he needs a kiss anymore. Not far from her, he sees Ashoka. She looks a little embarrassed and looks away from him. The guy asks if this is the entrance to the cave, and the girls answer him positively. Sequoia tells him that while he was unconscious, they explored this cave a little, and in 5 minutes of walking, they did not meet anyone dangerous. The main character thanks Aroa, and she sincerely rejoices at his praise. Sequoia happily throws his hand up and says that since Joshua has woken up, then you can go explore the cave. The guy agrees with her, but suddenly remembers something. Already in the depths of the cave, Sequoia wonders how he could have forgotten the lamp. The girl uses her magic to light the way for her friends. She looks maliciously at Joshua, who apologizes to her dejectedly. Joshua asks Arua not to go far, as she may stumble. She reminds him that she is a cat, and darkness is her friend. Sequoia says that cats are cats, and she can explore even the deepest part of the cave. The guy says that the cat people are capable. However, Kitsune abruptly interrupts him and looks at him with a serious expression on his face. The girl tells the guy that this does not apply to other people, because Aru is special. The main character and the two girls next to him continue to make their way through the pitch darkness of the cave. The only thing that lights their way is the flame of Shokoi, who walks next to Joshua. The guy exclaims in surprise and talks about how deep this cave is. The main character believes that they are lucky that so far they have not come across any forks. Water drips monotonously from the stalactite. Suddenly, the main character's foot slips off, and he falls to the floor of the cave with a crash. The girls immediately turn to their friend. Suddenly, they see a small space in front of them. The guy turns his head from side to side in amazement and exclaims loudly. Abaru notices the danger ahead and remains alert. Suddenly, the girl turns to Joshua and pulls out a dagger. The cat girl shouts to her friends to duck and throws the blade forward with a lightning movement. The guy looks at her in disbelief. Joshua turns his gaze to what his subordinate's attack was aimed at and exclaims in surprise. Sequoia also looks at the unidentified object in surprise. They are surprised to find a lookout ahead. Joshua says they are monsters that look like eyes. They hide from their prey in the dark and attack sharply. Shokoya happily says that these are very tasty monsters. The girl asks if she is going to eat, but then quickly pushes Joshua away. As it turned out, the girl saved the main character from another attack by another looker. This time, Sequoia realizes without slowing down what to do, and uses her magic to kill the monster. The main character watches in surprise as his remains fall to the ground and wonders aloud that he shot a laser out of his eye. Joshua is amazed that this world is full of surprises. After a while, the friends finally discover a fork in the road. The main character turns to the girls and asks them where they want to go. Suddenly, he finds bats in front of him and exclaims loudly in fear. With a trembling hand, he points to the inhabitants of the cave and, stammering, says that they have found where they can get excrement. Joshua is very afraid of mice and suggests that he quickly collect everything he can and get out of here as soon as possible. It was very difficult for the guys, But in the end, they found a good place. The guy believes that their expedition was successful. Upon returning home, they are greeted by a joyful Ellie and Charlie. The main character is relieved to say that they are at home. Ellie says that they will start cooking dinner now, so she suggests that Joshua rest properly. The girl urges Aurora to go with her. The main character is a little embarrassed to ask the assistant for forgiveness and asks her to prepare the bathroom for them first. According to Joshua, Shokoi, and Aruru, it is clear that they did their best, since all three are very dirty. The girl does not resist. With a smile on her face, Charlie expresses her desire to help her new friend. She refuses, but the Count's daughter insists and asks her permission to thank her for teaching her so many things. Ellie gives up. Aru and Ellie are drying themselves with towels as they leave the bathroom. Kitsune exclaims joyfully about how good she feels. The guy sees the girls and says it's his turn now. He notices Ellie and asks her to come to him after finishing her business. At first, the girl looks at the main character in surprise, amazed at this proposal. But then she agrees. There is a slight blush on her cheeks. All the guys are enjoying a relaxing time. Joshua sighs with relief and thinks about how good he feels. He spends time with his friends. Sojiro eats delicious fish, and Aru sleeps. The main character was released to his bed. He holds his shoulder with his hand and complains that his whole body aches. Joshua complains about himself and says that he needed to exercise more often. He holds important papers in front of him. The guy reflects that now blacksmithing has become a part of their scientific research. And even if they did not find all the necessary materials, they have acquired a very useful friend in the form of a penguin. At least this way they will be able to develop their science. Joshua continues to reflect that their scientific progress depends entirely on the availability of the right materials. In addition, he believes that they need to think and decide what they need in the household. Suddenly there is a knock on the door. The man behind the door says she's Ellie. The main character abruptly rises from the bed and asks her to enter the room. The girl obediently goes inside the room and, a little shy, stands at the door, shyly holding her hands in front of her. Joshua looks at the girl with a smile on his face. He asks his subordinate to sit next to him on the bed. She awkwardly apologizes and sits down next to the main character. Suddenly, his eyes widen in surprise. He looks at her in amazement and then sniffs even more. The guy asks the girl if she used perfume. She gets covered in paint. She thought it was necessary since he invited her. The main character coughs his throat a little and smiles into his fist. The girl does not understand his behavior and asks for clarification. Joshua explains to her that he could tell by the smell of sesame oil. She still doesn't understand what he's talking about. He tells her that perfumes and luxury food are not necessities, but are very important to create a sense of rich life. The guy tells her that when he thinks about how much he still has to do, his head hurts. Ellie says that she is sure that he will definitely succeed. Joshua agrees with her and says that he will have to take small steps towards this. Providing people only with housing and food, he will not be able to achieve comfort for them. Unexpectedly for the girl, the guy tilts his head in her direction and, with a smile on his face, tells her that he realized this only because of her. The main character thanks Ellie, which makes her blush again. She shyly looks away and says that she is unworthy of his gratitude. The guy looks at it in surprise and notices that she is much more nervous than usual. He understands that it's awkward for her to come to the guy's room at such a late hour. Joshua explains to Ellie that he called her because he wanted to ask her something. She confusedly says that she will answer all his questions. The guy, since she spent today with Charlie, asks her to tell her about her new responsibilities. Ellie tells him that she's been writing down everything she says all day. The guy is surprised by this and asks his subordinate if they had a rest at all. The girl answers him in the negative, saying that they worked without breaks and even during lunch they were not distracted by cooking, but had a snack on the go. The main character is a little perplexed by this. Joshua apologizes to her, as she had a hard time today, but nevertheless she still came to his room at such an hour. The girl abruptly jumps up from her seat and says that she is ready to come to him at any time. He puts his hand on her head. The main character gently strokes her hair and asks the girl not to overwork. He thinks that sometimes it's better to have a good rest. Ellie's face is covered with blush, and her eyes acquire a joyful shine. The girl closes her eyes from the very strong embarrassment caused by Joshua's actions and agrees with him. The main character happily says that he expects her help tomorrow. Joshua argues that now they need to redistribute the responsibilities of the others. The girl suggests tomorrow, during a meeting with Paul and the others, to listen to their opinion on this issue and decide later. Joshua agrees with her and says that she is right. Ellie blushes a little again. He thanks her once again for coming to him at such an hour and asks her to return to her room and have a good rest. She exclaims in disbelief, "A new day is coming, and the rays of the sun are making their way through the crowns of the trees." Charlie brings Joshua milk again. Last night, Ellie just returned to her room, and the guy fell asleep from the accumulated fatigue of the day. Charlie asks the main character if there will be more people at the meeting today. He answers the girl's question positively and with a smile on his face, says that he is very much waiting for this. After a while, the meeting finally begins, and Richmond appears in front of Joshua and his friends. The man bows respectfully and says that it is an honor for him to talk to him. The other man next to him introduces himself as Paul. The main character thinks about himself that Paul is an ordinary man, but Richmond wears a mask and a black top hat. Now the guy understands what Walter was talking about. He is a very unusual person. The main character also shows due respect to the new guests and says that he is also very happy to meet them. The Earl is looking at Paul and Richmond very carefully. Suddenly, the guy asks the butler if this is the Richmond he knows. Rundberg undoubtedly confirms his guesses and says that he met with him earlier. Joshua thinks they are very lucky that he met an old friend. Joshua starts the meeting. He tells the guests about the forecasts regarding the residents staying and about the need to build residential buildings and infrastructure. He also mentions the absence of magic stones. Joshua asks Charlie if the girl has analyzed the residents. She responds positively and says that about 60% of all residents are farmers and traders, 20%. The remaining 20% are artisans. The Count is glad that Charlie was able to understand what he meant in a half word. The guy asks Rumberg how many people live on their lands. He replies that there are about 1,000 people and rejoices at the huge number of people who respect his master. The guy says that their current plan provides for the creation of housing for 3,000 people. He asks Paul if he can tell him how many people are involved in building houses. He explains that about 100 people are employed in the construction of houses. He also says that in parallel they are trying to build barns to improve the quality of life. Joshua wants to make him the main one in carrying out this plan. Paul is discouraged by this. The young Count looks at his subordinate with a smile on his face and says that if he does not have enough wood, then he can build houses out of bricks. The main character asks Paul if he can handle it. The man is very surprised by the responsibilities assigned to him and, stuttering a little with excitement, answers the Count's question positively. Paul bows and thanks him. The guy says he's counting on him, and then, in short, it's mining resources for a Rumberg. He asks him to assemble a detachment of 50 people, keep in touch with the construction team, and go to extract the necessary material for them. The main character asks Richmond if he can assign him to monitor the security of their city. The man apologizes to him and says that he does not have the right qualities for this job. However, Joshua recalls Valtor's words that he is quite capable. He also makes it clear to the man that he does not mind if he consults with Valtor and Rumberg. After all, this is a very difficult job for one person. However, Richmond still considers it a bad idea and says that his offer is a great honor for him. But at the same time, this job requires a responsible approach. The guy tries to persuade him again, but the man says that he really wants to see the rise of this city and them in particular, and that is why he believes that he is not suitable for this position. Joshua privately assumes that something happened in the past that undermined his self-confidence. Joshua says that many people who have arrived here have discarded their past. Someone came here to start a new life. There are even adventurers in the city. Merchants and workers abandoned their jobs, and some came to these lands because they were expelled. The man is silent for a long time. The guy says that for someone, what they left behind or what precious memories were taken away from them, and for someone, a despised thing. The young man gets up from his seat. Joshua says that Oracle is the city of the future. This is a city whose residents strive for a bright tomorrow, and, having arrived here, people stop clinging to the past and think only about the future. The main character tells the man that he does not know what kind of person he was in the past, but the guy also notices that it does not matter. Richmond looks at him in amazement. The guy asks Richmond, who is sitting in front of him, if he can help them. The man repeats the words of the main character and gives up under his pressure. He reaches for the mask and is about to take it off, but the guy stops him. The main character tells the man that he doesn't have to take off his mask if he doesn't want to. Joshua is sure that he wears it for a reason and assumes that it is very important to him, so he does not mind if he remains a masked knight. Richmond smiles. He says that people weren't lying when they said he was very kind, and he doesn't have enough words to express how grateful he is to him. Rumberg looks at this with approval. The man takes his hat off his head and bows to Joshua in a gesture of gratitude. Richmond swears that as long as his body is able to move, he will follow all his instructions and will gladly take over the post of head of security. The main character responds to his new subordinate with a smile on his face. Joshua is immensely pleased that they have become one step closer to creating a prosperous city and exclaims joyfully, "A new day is coming," and many residents of the town that Joshua created go out to numerous fields to harvest crops and carry out rural work. The guy says that the land is cultivated here, and it is a beautiful field. Tomas says, with a smile on his face, that the harvest has not yet grown enough to be harvested. But they have no problems with food, since they have a lot of cassava both for cultivating fields and clearing land for building houses. The main character says that this is good and asks the worker if they will have problems with harvesting. Thomas explains to Joshua that they are starting to grow other crops. The man says that they hope that they will be able to harvest in the fall. The guy is looking forward to it. Shirley, who is standing next to him, turns her head in his direction and urges him to come here next time. The weather is a little cloudy outside, but this does not prevent the cows from walking in a pen built of planks. There is a sheep pen next to the cow pen. 3 people are watching the animals and controlling them. The girl says that they have several cows, sheep, and goats. She also tells the main character that the salmon birds are still sitting in their houses, but they plan to build a birdhouse and a hacienda for them. The main character asks his assistant if there is anyone who looks after the farm. She responds positively, but says that it is not permanent, but in shifts. Joshua smiles happily. He thanks the girl and says that the farm turned out to be better than he expected before. She refuses and is a little embarrassed by his words. She says that she has just arrived, and all this was done by the guys from the City of Oracles. The action is transferred to the duchy from which the main character was expelled. Suddenly, the Holy Virgin wrinkles her forehead and says, in disbelief, that she did not think such a thing was possible. Suddenly, a young man bursts into the room and addresses her. The girl turns her head slightly in his direction and asks the man if he has filled out the questionnaire, and also tells him to put it on the altar. However, he did not come for this, and hurries to tell her that the matter is very urgent. The girl, in disbelief, asks the young man who broke into her how she can help. The man shouts that Count Seyfried has declared his independence, and that he is a nobleman with lands in the northwest of the duchy. And as he understands, he has close ties with the empire in the north of the duchy. The girl interrupts his speech. He asks the Holy Virgin what she will do with the Count, and wonders if she is going to gather the commander of the military leaders of the order for a meeting. The girl sighs heavily and asks if this is necessary. The man says they will gather as much information as possible and will be able to help her deal with it. The Holy Virgin stands in front of the statue and says that God did not tell them anything, so there is no need to do anything. The man asks the oracle this, to which the girl responds positively and says that God told her something else. Suddenly, the Holy Virgin becomes serious and shouts that he must urgently prepare medicine. A small, cozy town surrounded by stone walls is located in the middle of a small forest. The main character has been in Cumberland for several months now. Joshua is engaged in the city and its development. He resumed battery production and brought the materials to perfection. All he had to do was figure out how to generate energy, and he would need some power to do that. The main character backs away in fear when a large monster jumps out at him from behind the bushes. Joshua is very afraid of the animal in front of him and exclaims loudly because of this. However, the monster turns out to be absolutely friendly. Sequoia approaches the drinking animal and says that they have a contract and she will help Joshua for the syrup. Cumberland syrup. Maple tree juice found on a walk with Arls. The main character looks at this picture a little in disbelief. The monster next to him is waving its tail in a friendly manner, like a dog. The guy asks when they can come to the forge tomorrow. Out of curiosity, Joshua touches his fur. The penguin standing next to him opens his eyes and his beak in surprise. The countryman of the main character watches the monster in amazement. There is admiration in his eyes. Sojiro enthusiastically says that this is very interesting and rushes to touch the monster with his paw. But Layla holds it in place. The penguin wonders if this bluish-white color is electrified. The main character asks Shokoi if he can take some of the demon's hair. The girl turns her head towards the animal and then says that he allowed her to take some around the tail. The guy sincerely thanks her. The girl cuts a couple of strands from her tail. Joshua holds them out to his friends, showing him the wool. Ellie asks him how this hair can be useful. He explains to her that he used it in the filament of a light bulb. Sojiro compares them to tungsten. Penguin thoughtfully says that this material seems easier to process than tungsten. He can't say for sure, and until his properties are studied, but he can find other uses. The guy agrees with him and says that he knows about it, but believes that they will deal with it later. He turns to Seikon and tells her that he needs to know what current is flowing through the body of the Thunder Beast. The girl nods her head. She tells him that he can sit here, and then tells Ellie that she should squat down next to Joshua too. Shokoya unceremoniously sits down on the main character, which is why he shouts in displeasure. The girl grabs the penguin's hand and begins to use her magic. Sequoia says that touching is the simplest, and visual exchange is very difficult. She tries her best, and then opens her eyes and looks ahead. After her magic, both the main character and Sujiro, when they look at the monster in front of them, see inexplicable streams, similar to the light. Kitsuna asks them if they see it. The guy guesses that this light is mana. The guy thinks that this is mana, and if you look at magic as an academic discipline, then seeing mana is probably elementary, but it's new to him. Joshua continues to watch the monster. He notices a small light on the tips of his fur. The main character thinks to himself that the pale, shining charge also beats in time with his breathing. He notices that the ankles are not charged and assumes that this is because they are relaxed. He also understands that the movement of mana is not focused on the back that is charged. This becomes a very difficult mystery for him, and he continues to stare intently at the monster. Suddenly, Ellie asks him what he thinks, and the guy says that he needs to be able to track mana a little longer so that he can draw some conclusions. The penguin is already saying that he knows that the Thunder Beast uses mana. The guy asks him if he can see the Thunder Beast breathing. He says that he sees the movement of his breathing. Ellie interrupts him and says that this is not it, and he is breathing mana. The girl briefly tries to explain to them that the air is full of mana, and they take it out of the air to support life. The main character thinks about her words, and this becomes an occasion for his reflections. Suddenly, Joshua raises his head up and says in concentration that it would be great if he could see mana in the air. The main character takes a deep breath and closes his eyes. He thinks intently about something, and then opens them. His eyes widen in surprise, and his mouth opens wide as he looks up. The main character sees small spherical sparks in front of him. The main character exclaims in surprise that he sees mana. Ellie advises him to keep an eye on how the mana moves now. His face instantly becomes focused, and he begins to observe the balls in the air. Joshua wonders if mana is absorbed directly into the Thunder Beast's body. He sees how the monster inhales small balls, and realizes that the largest amount of mana is absorbed through the mouth. The main character realizes that the absorbed mana is spreading throughout the body, and sees how it is distributed inside the thunder monster. Suddenly, he turns his attention to the wool and sees a sparkle coming out of one of the hairs. Suddenly, for everyone, both Joshua and Sojiro cry out loudly, amazed at what they have just seen. Both the guy and the penguin have genuine delight in their eyes. The latter says how interesting it is. Joshua suggests that the Thunder Beast's hair acts as a catalyst and converts mana into electricity. The penguin agrees with him and says that the closest such mechanism he knows is bioluminescence. Sequoia watches them in surprise. The guy asks him what it is. The penguin explains that bioluminescence is a luciferous reaction, but he believes that the electrification of the beast is also a monoreaction. Sequoia rubs his head up and says that magic doesn't just happen when you think about it. The guy looks at her in disbelief. The girl says that she has explained this before and recalls the principality of Rudel. Kitsune explains that there is a logic behind this, similar to the chemical formula in his brain, or the imprint on his body. It depends on each of them. He must accumulate mana and transform it. The countryman of the main character reflects on this and eventually compares life in this world with computer circuits that construct and activate magic. After all, he assumes that the beast's thunder technique is in its fur. Sequoia confirms his words and says that magic is flowing right through him. The girl wonders if he sees her. The guy says that the hairs are used to convert mana into electricity. He assumes that he needs to see a single hair. The girl says that it works in the opposite direction. Joshua is surprised by this. Suddenly, the girl picks up a stick and asks to be allowed to draw a formula for them. The main character thinks to himself that magic is really amazing, and he really can't understand it. Then, after some time, trial and error, the battery was ready. Penguin and Joshua look with admiration at the battery, which they have assembled with their own hands. Sequoia calls them over and asks them to look at something. Penguin says it's still in the prototype stage. The girl asks why they don't run it. The main character is a little confused by her question and can't say anything for sure. Suddenly, he turns to the penguin and asks him if he has made an AC-DC converter. However, the penguin says that he has forgotten, and the main character looks at him in disbelief. The guy shouts that he needed a converter to make the current constant, otherwise he won't be able to charge the battery. Sojiro justifies himself by saying that electricity generation does not make the current constant. The penguin says that he will prepare it right away. However, the guy stops him and says that in order to make a converter, you need a semiconductor. But Sojiro smiles slyly at his words. He says that they have excellent technology. The penguin calls their light bulb shiny. The main character looks at it with delight and joyfully exclaims that it is a vacuum tube. Joshua thinks that this is one of the greatest diodes, and with it they can control the current. Sequoia doesn't understand what they're talking about, and then the guy explains to her that this is the thing she helped him with. Suddenly, he looks at her strangely. The main character looks at the girl with enthusiasm and asks her if she can create a magic formula to create a vacuum. The girl gives him the same look and asks him to entrust it to her. Joshua thinks that magic is really amazing. Sequoia happily says that the battery is ready. Joshua thinks that the sophisticated technology of glass metalworking is the merit of Toray and Gaimar. Sequoia developed the magic form, and the rest was left to the penguin. The main character takes a catalytic lever in his hand and thinks that he wants to make a magic stone using electricity. It was his idea, and the guys gave it shape. The mechanism is finally starting to work. Thor is happy that they get mana from the tufts of the Thunder Beast's hair, and Gamara just exclaims in surprise, amazed at this. Joshua wonders if Garam and the others can see mana. The guy insistently asks the girl to go to them as soon as possible. Kitsune explains to him that she has already cast a spell, and soon they will see everything. Joshua is a little perplexed, but thanks her. The expression on the face of the young man and the penguin changes very quickly. At first, they are focused on watching the behavior of the battery. Then they are happy, and then they look at it in disbelief. A man standing next to them asks them if they have any problems. He looks at the main character with incomprehension. The same one, in turn, a little perplexed, says that he is sure that Mom is doing it. He says that the mana flows out of the battery and goes straight through the glass. Joshua asks the penguin with excitement in his voice if they can keep mana inside the battery. Sequoia thoughtfully makes the assumption that they can lock her up. The guy asks the girl if she's talking about sealing him with some kind of magic so that the mana doesn't leak out. The girl turns away from him and goes in the opposite direction, saying that there are several ways to do this. but she's not sure if she can do it manually. The main character looks at her in disbelief. He sees her rummaging through her personal vault. In the end, the girl finds a spool of thread in her trunk. She says that these are arachne threads, and they have a mono-blocking ability. The main character suggests wrapping it around him or making a cloth out of it. The girl gets angry and says that she is too lazy to do this, so she will just do something with her magic. Sequoia is reciting some kind of spell. After applying the girl's magic on the threads, some of them begin to braid the battery with rapid movements. The main character watches from the side as their device can no longer be seen due to the huge number of threads. Eventually, instead of a battery, a large lump of arachne strands forms. The girl says it's getting harder to extract mana, and the penguin notices that it accumulates inside the battery. He suggests placing several bodies for the test. They shove a large magic stone inside, which has used up all the magic contained in it, and now it has become just a stone. Collected metal and stones found on the riverbank. Today, they will leave the electricity on and see what happens the next day. The main character stands in front of a lot of his subordinates and broadcasts from the podium. The guy says he can't help but thank them for all the hard work they do day in and day out. Joshua says they have finally reached the point where they can build a bridge, and it will be a difficult path to the goal. However, he clenches his hand into a fist and says that he believes that they can easily climb the highest mountain and will be able to do it. They have made preparations for this, and now they just have to see how it is completed. The Duke solemnly announces that the construction of the Rubicon Aqueduct and the Oracle Aqueduct will begin, and the opening of the water and sewer system will enrich agriculture, trade, and everything else in their lives. The main character suggests that people move forward together as one nation. Many people listening to his speech cheerfully express their agreement with the leader. After the social event, Joshua approaches his assistants. He tells the man that he is in good hands, and with their help, they will be able to do everything. He says that he is delighted, and the second man says that he is looking forward to it. He lifts his head up with pleasure and says he can't wait to see the water go over the bridges. The man is delighted with the very thought of it. The main character looks away and says with a smile that they will not be able to bring water into the houses, because they will have to rely on a magic stone. The guy says it depends on the result of the experiments. The action is postponed for some time. The guys continue to study the stones that they have examined with genuine interest. Sequoia curiously examines one of the stones. Suddenly she exclaims, the guy asks his girlfriend what happened, to which the girl says that she hoped that there was some mana left in a former magic stone. However, she shows another stone and says that in just one night it is recovered. According to Shokei's analysis, a stone that has depleted its mana reserves can be filled with mana and turned into a magic stone again. All the other samples also underwent certain changes, but silver did not become a mineral. There's not enough mana in it. The main character thinks that lead and glass are also filled with mana, but they have not turned into magical metal either. He says that the iron turned out because of its high purity. The penguin finds this interesting and would like to try it with different substances, because different substances require different amounts of mana to turn into magical metal. Suddenly, the main character comes up with ideas, and he says that perhaps magical metals are less common than usual, and iron and silver can be obtained in large quantities. The penguin picks up the main character's thought without any problems, and says that in this way the blue metal and mineral will eventually become readily available substances. Joshua is very happy about this and says that it is incredibly revolutionary. because not only mass production of magic stone, but also magic metal is possible. Right now, due to the construction, the supply of magic stone is poor. The main character is very happy about this discovery and understands that from now on the city of Oracle will grow by leaps and bounds. He enjoys the thought of a pillow and remembers that his goal is to last the next 3 years. The narrative is transported back in time. The lands of the people, divided into territories once for a short time. For convenience, this country was called an empire. The empire's power over a vast territory was suppressed by many countries and regions. Neighboring states feared that it could continue to expand, and 10 years after the unification of peoples, internecine strife began on its territory. The leading lords became independent, and rivalry ensued. But instead of buying them off, the emperor either took them in or established friendly relations with them. The Holy See was most active at this time. The emperor made the Holy Faith the state religion, avoided wars thanks to their teachings. To most people, the saint exalted her unchanging motives. The Holy Faith gained followers as the empire grew. It also became the state religion of the Duchy of Rudel, an independent princely state created by the Duchy of Rudel. The action is transferred to the Rudel Principality, namely the Grand Palace. The man is a little discouraged by what is happening and warily says that the saint said that there are signs of illness. Another man wonders how such a disaster could have befallen them if they always listened to the previous saint. His interlocutor talks about the oracle's gift of foresight. However, they are interrupted by a girl in the room. The Holy Virgin says that her faith will not be shaken, but she is worried that the judgments of those who receive God's word may not always be correct. The man looks at the girl warily. She closes her eyes with a calm expression and says that if the Duke stays here longer, he will suffer misfortune. Also, the Holy Virgin mysteriously says that he will not find peace here. All the men in the room are looking at her worriedly, thinking to himself that Joshua brought prosperity to the duchy, and he was expelled, no matter what God says. He wonders if he has understood the meaning of the divine word correctly. He also reflects on the Holy Virgin. One of the men is thinking about what to do. The second is wondering if they should leave the Duke. And the third is thinking about what St. Joshua would say to this. All the people in the room are silent in disbelief. Men do not dare to object to the Holy Virgin, but they look at each other disapprovingly. They wonder how Joshua is living now. At this time, in a small town built from scratch, residents pray at the statue of the main character. The city is full of life. Someone works in the fields, plowing the land. Someone grazes cattle. Blacksmiths work tirelessly in shops, making new tools. Workers are laying out the foundation for the road, using ordinary stone for this purpose. The main character looks at the construction of the city's infrastructure and reflects on the fact that he consulted with everyone, and they made progress in the construction of the aqueduct. Suddenly, his eyes open wide, and he thinks that the beams of the bridge are already in place. It's only been 3 days, and so he's surprised at how fast the workers are working. He can't even believe that it was done manually. For future convenience, the city's waterways go underground, and construction seems to be going well. The guy is watching how people are trying. Joshua thinks that it is too big for the current population, but it is quite suitable for future development. The main character looks at the construction work with admiration. Once the minimum infrastructure is in place, he would like to do more and more things, which will enrich people's lives. However, he does not consider it too big a dream. Joshua shouts loudly to his subordinates to make sure they take a break. The workers look at him in surprise at first, and then exclaim joyfully. The main character understands that their health is the main thing. At the same time, Sojiro observes the behavior of their device in action. Sequoia attentively examines the stones and writes down some important observations in a notebook. Joshua turns to the girl. He asks her how they are doing. She looks at him in surprise. The girl says that she is researching how much magic is contained in the stone. The main character laughs enthusiastically.